the Northern Ireland Assembly.
We're on time, so we'll call the meeting to order and remind members and those in the public gallery switch off mobile phones as they may interfere with the sound recording system. Could I remind members and those in the public gallery to switch off mobile phones as they may interfere with the sound recording system, and this meeting will be on camera. Also remind members of their obligation to declare any relevant financial or other interests in relation to today's business. Yes.
Sarah, my GA membership.
Okay.
I think that should be kept for every meeting.
We'll have to go through the process, I think,
okay.
of doing everything.
Thank you.
Chair, likewise.
Okay.
Can I ask maybe why yourself hasn't declared an interest?
Why?
Can I ask why you haven't declared an interest, given that your role?
But I have.
You haven't done in recent meetings?
I have, actually.
Chair,
yes, it has been.
It has been at each
been
meeting.
recorded?
Yes, it has been, yeah. And just to put on record again that I was in the department as Minister at the point where in the previous mandate when this process started some years ago. So, also reminding members of the relevant business interests, I'm sure that applies there as well. Also to ensure the volume on all tablet devices is off. Quickest way to do that is to press function and F8. Following members have offered their apologies. Just the one this week, William Humphrey, was away on assembly business. And are members aware of any other apologies? No. We have the draft minutes of the meeting of the 28th of May, and those are at page 5. Are members in agreement those minutes are an accurate record of the meetings?
Great.
Okay. Brings us then to the inquiry papers. I want to highlight to members that a reference pack has been provided for each member and is in a blue folder in front of them. The pack contains information which may be referred to throughout the inquiry and therefore is provided for ease of reference. Members are asked to leave these folders behind following each meeting, which will allow the committee staff to collect them and then redistribute them next week. I can also refer members to a letter from GAA at page 228 of the table papers in response to the invitations issued to the GAA, Populous and Heron Buckingham JV to brief the committee. The GAA has indicated its wish that this should be made into a joint briefing lasting for an extended period. And members, I'm sure, will have views on that. I would just say personally that I think that it is more effective if we have better opportunity and freedom to follow up on issues and interrogate them through to conclusion if people come in separately. So you would bring the GAA. Now, whether you bring Populous and Heron Buckingham, because architect and builder, that would need to be looked at. But our members, what would be the opinion of members on the matter? Yes, David?
So far, everybody's coming on their own, so why change the process at this stage?
Okay.
Are they asking for a joint presentation together or on the same day?
Chair, the way the letter reads, it's a joint presentation, so they would have representatives of GAA, also then representatives from the design team and the contractor as well.
So it would be effectively a single occasion with everybody lined up across the end there.
Sure, because the project was designed in bold, I think that's the rationale behind that, so I presume that is what they're thinking. I think it would be perfectly in order.
Yes, I think so.
Well, we have a number of members, obviously, who feel that it would be better to have folk in separate, and that's personally my own view, as I've said already. It's very much up to this committee as to how we conduct the business, how we follow through on issues. So, could I just, I think we need to put the thing to a vote. Don't see a way around that. Yeah.
Chair, just sorry. The same thing if you go down to look at the builder and the architect, you express partial concern there. Do you separate those two?
Well, they haven't written in yet, so
But
we
no, it
will
doesn't
need
matter
to...
if they're called to the committee.
No, we will deal with, they have been called. If they write back and say they want to come together, we will look at that time.
If you make a decision now...
Could we take...
Before you go in,
Sorry, Chair, I wasn't quite finished.
Right.
If you take a decision to separate people now, then you've set a precedent for the rest of the inquiry.
Right, okay, Basil?
why are you concerned about, I mean, normally if people write in and have a request to bring experts along with you,
Chair,
I don't see what the problem
maybe I
is.
should clarify, Chair. If members notice the reference to invitations, the committee had agreed to write to the design architects and also the contractor. We haven't received responses from them. What has happened is they have talked to GAA about the invitations that they've been sent and have agreed together to do a briefing. So that's just to clarify the situation is they were invited, everybody was invited. And we haven't heard separately from the design people or the contractor. The only response we've had is via the GAA, but as I said, it's for members to have.
all I was asking was, because the chair expressed an opinion, at first glance I don't see what the problem is. But
It would be, I think it's normal practice that if someone is being brought, they may have people from their department or others with them, but that the particular session is with that individual or with that organisation. That's not to say that others could not come with the GA people and sit there and they could converse with them at some point, but the focus would be on that day on the evidence from that organisation. That's been the normal practice with other inquiries.
Well, I think that would be okay if the GAA bring people with them on the understanding that the emphasis is on the GAA, then I think that's okay.
Okay, we'll write back and say that if they bring others with them.
On numerous other occasions at committee inquiries, there have been panels giving evidence, panel made up of 4 or 5 separate organisations, and there's been no problem in the past with that.
Okay.
Chairman, I would propose we continue as we started, listening to each on an individual basis.
But if they bring somebody with them to sit in the public and there and provide advice.
Those in support, yeah.
Chair, critical to this inquiry is the design aspect. Now we're getting the organisation that is commissioned and the designers in the one place. I think we should take them together.
Yep.
Okay, there's 2 different views there. It's been proposed by David, seconded by myself, then that we would take that. That was the first proposal. That we bring them in on the basis of what I was suggesting there, that it is the GA coming in, but they can bring advisors with them. Okay, and then we'll have separate sessions then with the others if we need that.
Chair,
Sure, that's not.
just to be clear on that, so the proposal that the GA has put forward that they would have these other people with them at the table. There was normal practice, I think, elsewhere for civil servants or something to sit there beside a minister, for example. But if the GA come, the questioning will be to them, it's not to the others. So only the GA would be at the table.
They're the ones. They can get in as much. They can go around and get files.
Proposal.
They can have files, they can have advice, they can have all sorts of interaction with the others. But the focus would be on one at a time. Yes?
Well, I'd like to make a proposal that we accede to the request of the GAA.
Well, if we vote against this one, then we'll come to that. Take one at a time. That's
If
fine.
that one falls, then things stand effectively.
Okay, the initial proposal from...
Can I just clarify what you're saying? Are you saying that the GAA and their advisors can be at the table?
Well, I would think the people who have been brought to the session of the GAA, we may well wish to bring Populous and Herald Buckingham JV on a separate occasion to talk to them on their own, as we'd be entitled to do. And we will decide that in due course, I'm sure, as a committee.
Right, just
Sorry, if you'd let me finish, please.
beg your pardon.
So we've been, the suggestion there is that this particular session will be with the GAA. If they bring others with them, they can refer to them for information, advice, whatever, but they would not be sitting at the top table. They would be...
Chair,
That's
you've just said yourself that the normal practice is for a minister
minister's
to have their advisors with them
Just saying
at
that
the
the
table.
minister.
Why are we departing from normal?
The questions are directed to the minister, not to the civil servants. Questions are always directed to the minister, if that is the person's comment.
Yes, but the minister has access to the advice of
Indeed.
civil
We've
servants
got
at the table.
two different views, I think, with a lot of business to do today. Rather than spending a long amount of time on this, could I ask, first of all, those who are taking, would agree with the proposal from David Hilditch and Gordon Dunn, please indicate.
So that proposal is that the GA alone are at the table.
Yes.
That was proposed by Mr Hilditch and seconded by Mr Dunn. So this is for that proposal then. That's 4.
Okay.
So then, Chair,
Those against?
that's...
So those in favour then of the other proposal that was put there, that they all brought
Well,
together?
that proposal then falls, so there's no
Just
need
put
for a
the
second vote.
proposal.
It stands as
Rosie-
it is, but if
Rosie
you want
put
to
the
go there,
proposal.
if you want to do
So that's fine. Okay, that will deal with them together then.
I'd second it.
Well, it's
I think the members
It's
want to
okay.
do a proposal.
We'll do it formally,
Do a
okay.
proposal.
All those in favour of
So
Rosie's proposal?
Ms McCorley's proposal is that it's as the GA have asked. And we have a seconder for that, Mrs McCavitt.
Okay.
So then if it's 4 on that one,
All those in favour of that?
so that's 6.
6.
And those
Thank
against
you.
that then? Okay.
Okay. Next item then is letter from Maura at page 233 of the tabled papers. So if we just refer to that for a moment.
233.
Suggests that the affidavits provided during the JR process should be requested by the committee as part of this inquiry. And particularly, Maura makes reference to the affidavit by the then interim permanent secretary, Mr Peter May, who's before the committee today. Could I just ask, and I'll seek members' views on this, can I just ask, have we requested that information as yet?
Chair, what we'd requested was the judgments in the JR. We weren't
But
aware
not
of
the affidavits,
I
okay.
wasn't aware of those.
Well, would members be agreeable that we ask for those affidavits?
Great.
If the issue has been raised. Thank you. And could also highlight to members that the evacuation expert that the committee office had identified is not available. No other expert has been identified locally, and other avenues can be explored by the committee. Okay. Which brings us forward then into the inquiry into issues around emergency exiting plans, including their impact on stadium capacity, for the redeveloped Casement Park briefing from Sport NI this morning. And highlight to members that there are indicative timings for the 3 inquiry briefings scheduled for the meeting: 10 o'clock, now 10:20, 11:15 and 1 o'clock, with a short break before the last session at approximately 12:30. For the committee to be able to receive these briefings and deal with the business deferred from last week, it will be important for members to be succinct and ask questions rather than making statements.
Great.
Glad that's been so enthusiastically supported. Could I refer members to the clerk's memo at page 9? There is a briefing paper there at page 9 in your committee papers, and the briefing paper at page 9 refers to tabs that are found at page 3 of the tabled papers. It's the papers from Sport NI. So it is quite a substantial amount of material.
Need a bigger table.
Need
Need a bigger table.
Yeah.
There's so many table papers and
We'll get a filing tablet for every committee member. Could I welcome the following officials to the meeting? First of all, Andrew Sloan and then Nick Harkness. They're coming in now. Welcome to the meeting, Andrew Stone, who's the Director of Sports Management Services, and Nick Harkness, who's the Director of Participation and Facilities. And could remind members and witnesses, in this case, of their obligation to declare any relevant financial or other interests in relation to today's business. Okay, thank you. And invite the officials now to make their opening statement. Andrew and Nick, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to brief members on the Regional Stadia programme. Throughout this briefing, we hope to provide members with an overview of Sport Northern Ireland's specific involvement in the Regional Stadia programme, with a particular focus on, firstly, issues relating to the redevelopment of Casement Park, and secondly, communications that Sport Northern Ireland has had with our parent department, DCAL, in relation to the work of the Safety Technical Group, with a particular focus on emergency exiting. I'm joined today by my colleague Nick Harkness, Director of Participation and Facilities, who has had varying levels of involvement in the Regional Stadia programme both before and since its formal transfer to the department on the 30th of April 2012. Before providing further information on Sport Northern Ireland's specific involvement, I would like to make members aware that the outline business case for the 3 regional stadia was developed by McClure Waters in 2009-10 and signed off in March 2011 by the department's then Deputy Permanent Secretary, Dr. Agar Jardine. The OBC contains reference to site limitations, safety legislation and the potential for a reduced safe capacity. In September 2012, the Director of the Regional Stadia Programme at DCAL requested that Paul Scott, Safety Compliance Unit Manager at Sport Northern Ireland, establish a safety technical group to review the design proposals for Windsor Park, Casement Park and the Ravenhill Rugby football grounds, all of which were to be redeveloped using funding from the Regional Stadia Programme. The purpose of the STGs was to provide assurance that the stadiums would be designed and built in accordance with recognised guidance to ensure that the design capacity for each of the stadia would equate to the safety capacity as contained in the safety certificate. This safety certificate will be issued by the respective councils under the provisions of the Safety of Sports Grounds Order 2006 using guidance issued by Sport Northern Ireland on behalf of DCAL. Sport Northern Ireland Safety Compliance Unit Manager Paul Scott met with the Director of the Regional Stadia Programme, Noel Malloy, to provide advice on the proposed composition of the STGs and to explain the significant difference between the role of an STG and a Safety Advisory Group, i.e. an STG advises on safe design and a SAG advises on safe operation. The Director of the Regional Stadium Programme agreed to all of the advice offered and to the proposed composition of the STG as follows. The group would be chaired by the Safety Compliance Unit Manager of Sport Northern Ireland, and the other membership would include the Technical Officer of the Safety Compliance Unit, a representative of the Police Service for Northern Ireland with operational responsibility for the respective venue, a representative of the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service with experience in fire safety compliance issues, a representative of the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service with responsibility for emergency planning issues, representatives of Belfast City Council with responsibility for the implementation of the Safety of Sports Ground Order 2006, the Safety Officer for the respective venue, and finally other members could be co-opted as required. It was agreed that the Department would attend meetings of the STG as observers, and Mr Malloy advised that the Department would issue terms of reference for the STG in due course. Terms of reference were not provided, but Mr Malloy agreed to the following procedures with the Sport Northern Ireland Safety Compliance Unit Manager. These were design proposals as drafted by the design team would be forwarded to DCAL, who in turn would forward them to Sport Northern Ireland. Sport Northern Ireland would circulate the design proposals to the members and arrange a meeting of the STG. The STG would comment on the design, referencing it against the recognised guidance and the experience and competencies of the members. The findings would be communicated to DCAL, who would pass the comments to the design team. The design team would then make amendments and forward the revised drawings to DCAL, and so the process would continue until agreement was reached. Interim reports and a final report would be issued by the STG to DCAL. On the 8th of October 2012, Sport Northern Ireland Safety Compliance Unit Manager received a letter from the then Permanent Secretary, Rosalie Flanagan, thanking him for his professional input in connection with the Safety of Sports Grounds related design reviews on the Regional Stadia Programme. The letter states, "Your input is valued and provides a level of comfort to the Department, ensuring that design development prior to the submission of planning application will ultimately be compliant with best practice and capable of achieving full spectator capacity under safety certification for the various scenarios discussed and agreed to date." Decal attended early meetings of the STGs, but in August 2013, the Regional Stadium Programme Architect, Carol Southern, who was the department's nominated point of contact, advised that the department was very busy and did not have time to attend the meetings and did not require any meeting notes. He also advised that the STG could have the autonomy to contact key stakeholders directly, but they would require reports as and when required. More recently, on the 29th of April 2015, the department circulated an email to members of the STG attaching draft terms of reference for the group, which have now been signed off for consideration at the next meeting of the STG. This correspondence also confirms that Decal Sports Branch will provide secretariat support to the STG, and the terms of reference propose that the STG would be chaired by the Decal Stadium Team Direct Technical Officer. Essentially, there are three concerns relating to the redevelopment of Casement Park, two of which are interconnected: emergency exiting capacity, lack of outdoor circulation area, and the provision of open seating. When the Regional Stadium Programme Architect left the department in July 2014, the Sports Northern Ireland Safety Compliance Unit Manager was advised that the department's main point of contact would be then the Regional Stadium Programme Manager, Kieran McGurk. When he left in the winter of 2014, the Sport Northern Ireland Safety Compliance Unit Manager was advised that his point of contact would be Mary Skelly, and this remains the case. Following the decision of the department not to attend the STG meetings, key officials within Decal were regularly kept informed of all discussions and decisions made by the STG. I would like to now ask my colleague Nick Hartness, who will provide a summary of the key communications between Sport Northern Ireland and Decal on this matter.
Thank you, Chairman. Andrew. The clerk of the committee contacted Sport Northern Ireland in recent days to ask for relevant papers, and in light of the committee's particular interest in the chronology of communications between Sport NI and Decal on these matters, Sport NI provided a summary table of the range of communications that go back as far as March 2013. Those are provided in a summary table, and the supporting documents have been provided and tabbed at the request of the clerk also. In particular, I think these, the summary and the background papers illustrate that the risk of potential panic or crushing, the need for the provision of additional emergency exiting, the potential impact of the current design on S factor and P factor, and therefore the safe capacity of the ground, the potential need for any structural changes, and the potential significant impact on the S factor were all communicated over a series of months and years in relation to these. These were in relation to Casement Park, sorry. These were communicated to a range of officers within Decal, including two directors, the Deputy Secretary and the Permanent Secretary. And there was an offer made from Sport Northern Ireland via the Sports Grounds Safety SGAS, the Sports Ground Safety Authority, in relation to an independent review of the plans from a health and safety perspective. I'm happy to talk through the summary table if members would like that, but that might impact on time, so I'm happy just to take questions on it if that's more appropriate.
Okay. Do members wish them to go through all of the papers, or would you want to ask questions?
Questions, I think, Chair.
Okay, people have had the opportunity to read them through. If that's the case, then no dissenting voices, we'll go to questions. Councillor Hoshin.
Mr. Chair and gentlemen, this morning. There's reference throughout the presentation there and various papers here of risk issues and concerns. Could you define exactly what a risk and as a risk?
Well, terms used within some of the reports to identify risk talk about, in terms of emergency exiting, the risk of panic or crushing. That's in terms of if sufficient emergency exiting isn't provided. Talk about the need for the provision of emergency exiting plan so that can be assessed. Obviously, the assessment of a certificate, a safety certificate, is really an assessment of the relevant risks, and that impacts on the number of people that are recommended as the safe maximum capacity of the ground.
So when does a risk become an issue? When does an issue become a concern? And is that an escalation going through that in terms of descriptive language being used?
Well, a risk become an issue. If you go back to theory of risk management, an issue is the crystallisation of a risk. So in the event when something goes wrong on the day, an issue starts to emerge out of a risk, which is obviously what you want to avoid.
So there is an escalation of terminology.
Yes, so an issue emerges from the crystallisation of a risk. So if the stadium was built, and if there was an emergency, and if things started to go wrong, that would be an issue, because that would be the crystallisation of a risk. That's in risk management theory.
Okay, I'm just worried. I'm just wondering at the usage of the wording.
That's obviously where you don't want to be. You don't want to be with an issue on the day. You want to avoid that.
Or a concern. Or a concern.
Well, that's another terminology thrown into it.
I know, but they are used liberally throughout this, so that's why I'm asking.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. The STG initially was operating without terms of reference.
That's correct.
Right. Yet you came to an agreed membership without any terms of reference.
And the membership, I think, as Andrew's opening comments referred to, the membership was agreed in meetings between the Safety Compliance Unit Manager in Sport Northern Ireland and the then Director in the Department, Noel Malloy.
Right. And when did you become aware of the fact that there's no terms of reference?
Well, the terms of reference were requested on a number of occasions.
Right. So that's what you did to rectify it?
Yeah.
It's a request?
Well, the request was made on a number of occasions. The reports were provided, and there was no indication that the terms of reference was an issue at that time from the department.
Right. There's a reference made to an email from Rosalie Flanagan, where she states that the design development will ultimately be compliant.
I think that's a letter from Rosalie Flanagan, dated the 8th of October 2012.
Could you tell us what page that's on, so we...
I think that...
of what tab, rather?
I don't think that is in the main body of the text.
The word use of the word ultimately.
It's just,
I can read the
all the
extra.
members can get the actual letter. It's always helpful.
Page 4 or 15 of the presentation, depending on what you're looking at. Item 11.
I can read from the letter if that's helpful, Chairman.
Of the letter, it's a reference to the
Yes, it's just helpful to know the tab so we can actually see the actual letter.
I don't believe the letter's in the pack, Chairman, but I have a copy of it here.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
The letter was primarily, it was written on the 8th of October 2012, and it was essentially relating to work ongoing on Windsor. But the top of page 2 says it is essential that when the department approves this design to go forward for planning, we have confirmation from SNI overseeing body, that's the Safety Compliance Unit, PSNI and DCAL, who in truth are some of the main members of the STG, that all relevant and reasonable foreseeable safety scenarios have been considered and anticipated within the design, and importantly that the overall physical design is capable of achieving full spectator capacity within future venue certification.
Yeah, but Nick, that's in reference to Windsor.
It goes on to say that the casement project is now mobilising and the design team appointed. A provisional date of the 1st of November 2012 has been set and communicated to you for the first safety at sports grounds review. So it's clear indication there that the same process is expected for Casement Park.
So you're applying the same
that's what I interpret from that letter.
All right, okay. It is suggested there that Carl Southern, on behalf of DCAL, advised the department that he was too busy and did not.
Sport Northern Ireland, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Is there any written evidence of that?
There's no written evidence of that, but Carl desisted from attendance from that point on.
Okay, and how did he tell you that?
He communicated that to Paul Scott verbally. I'm advised.
Right. So he said he wasn't attending. Just a verbal.
Yes, and they no longer attend. They were there as observers rather than full members.
Right. The contact that was kept between officials in DCAL and the STG, how were you informed and kept up to date? How was that carried out?
Well, I had the opportunity to review documents emanating from the STG, and it became apparent to me towards the end of 2012 when I was aware of a letter of intent to a contractor to start the construction process that the reviews and recommendations of the STG hadn't actually made it into the design, and the design approval I understood at that time in December 2013 that the planning permission was imminent. So at that stage I became concerned that the review by the STG hadn't been accommodated in any updated designs, and that with construction imminent that there was the potential for the stadium to be built in a way that didn't support adequate emergency exiting.
And the STG minutes that are referred to are not, even Paul Scott said they weren't minutes, they were.
Well, there are three reports produced.
They were notes from meetings.
Well, there are three reports produced. There were 7 minutes, 7 meetings. The STG at Casement Park met on 7 occasions and produced 3 reports in 2013.
Right, but and were these based on these notes from?
No, they were reports produced
from notes of meetings.
From the conversations and discussions and measurements that took place at meetings. Yes, right. And those were provided, and those are provided within your pack.
And the point at which DCAL withdrew from the STG process, did I hear you talk about an email from Peter May on the 28th of March acknowledging the work of the STG? The
Sport NI Chief Executive emailed Peter May on the 18th of March 2014. Confirmed conversations a while ago over issues affecting safety at Casement Park, which had the potential to cause delays. Confirmed that DCAL accept that consistent SNI advice on these matters for some time. Reinforced the potential for risk on this critical area of responsibility, and suggested that SNI should be on each of the 3 project boards to verify advice is being given and seek solutions.
And there was some mention of the work on a emergency exit in there as well.
Yes, the detail of emails is included in your pack at tab 15 and 16.
Yeah.
Check for extracts from it.
So the department through this was working along with Sport NI?
Pardon?
The department were working along with Sport NI on this?
Well, certainly Chief Executive emailed the Permanent Secretary on that date, and he replied, accepting the consistent advice being given. Sorry, I'm on the wrong spot now. Acknowledged the good work of SNI via the STG, acknowledges work on emergency exiting programme is ongoing, and after consultation with the stadium team, declined our proposal to sit on the 3 project boards, but accepted that Sport NI, in relation to safety and comfort matters, should attend parts of the 3 steering groups, which are groups, sort of technical groups below each of the 3 project boards.
But there was cooperative work there.
Yes, there was. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Basil McCrane.
So let's go back to this first letter where it was to do with the Windsor, was it? The letter that said that you should consider the design details before it's been approved by the committee?
It was primarily focused. The letter was primarily focused on Windsor Park, but the penultimate paragraph does draw attention to the fact that the Casement Park project was mobilising and proposing arrangements for the first safety at sports grounds review of those plans.
So just to be clear on it, you read out the second on the second page the first paragraph, and it's a confirmation that the department wouldn't go forward until it had sign-off from relevant authorities, the police, Belfast City Council and SNIOB. Is that correct?
It suggests to me that the process would be that the department would approve the plans before they go for planning permission, and would only do so after confirmation that a full safety certificate was foreseeable.
So although that was for Windsor, did such a stipulation actually occur for the Casement Park project?
No, I'm not aware of it. My interpretation of the following paragraph is that that same principle would be applied to Casement Park.
So why do you think it wasn't?
I don't know.
Okay, so one of the issues that we are interested in finding out about is who knew what and when. And I wonder, the stadium sponsor board papers, that's the sponsor board is the top level of oversight, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Chaired by the Minister?
Chaired by the Minister, although not always. On occasions it's chaired by officials.
So could you tell me when, just tell me when it was first brought to the attention of that body that there was a problem with the emergency accident plan?
Well, as I said, around December 2013, I became concerned because I became aware that by which stage our only involvement with the programme at that stage was offering safety advice. We were no longer running the programme, so I became aware that a letter of intent to a contract was imminent, and was also aware that there was a meeting of that sponsor board taking place on the 18th of September. And I briefed our Chief Executive prior to that, and the minutes of the programme board illustrate that there was discussion, that there were different interpretations of the red and green guide, and therefore further discussions were required to resolve any issues, and it was agreed that the programme director and our Chief Executive would meet to discuss.
So that's page 162?
I have that. Tab 10.
Where's tab 10 on to?
I think it's the final page.
Yeah, I've got that.
Yes, yes, that's right. Section 510 in the minute.
So what does section 510 say?
It says that A. McKay further advised that there were different interpretations of the red and green guide, and therefore further discussions are required to resolve any issues. And there was an action point for Noel Malloy and Antoinette McCone to meet to discuss.
So what does that mean in English?
Well, it could be a soft way of describing the fact that there were concerns that the safety requirements as described in the red and the green guides weren't finalised within the design.
So if it took you to the point just before that, 5.9, where the governing body is concerned with note and Noel is confirmed that while guidance is adhered to, it should be noted that guidance could be subjective. Is that supporting the same case?
The red guide in itself does provide from deviations from the guide, as long as the alternatives provide for at least equal safety. So not every site, not every stadium across the UK complies to the letter, but there are always alternative provisions that will provide for at least a similar safety standard.
So can I just say that is the minute of the meeting of the 18th of December 2013?
That's correct, yeah.
And from what I can see, or maybe you can tell me, from then on, from meetings after that, was the matter of the emergency evacuation plan for Casement Park raised?
The papers for all the sponsor board meetings from the 10th of April to the 19th of March, of which there were 5, have the phrase that emergency evacuation plan to be further developed to meet the GAA's need for new capacity stadium.
But how seriously was it raised? I mean, it seems to be on every meeting. So one of the things that I'm keen to get to the bottom of, Mr. Harkness, is that some people have said, well, this was all news to me. But
well, I think, as I've described earlier, you know, our Chief Executive's email to the Permanent Secretary raised it at the highest levels within the department that it's a potential for risk on this critical area of responsibility.
But was it recognised as being a serious problem by the sponsor board and a possibility of derailing the whole project?
The phrases that are within the reports, such as the potential for panic or crushing, the need for the provision of additional emergency exiting, the potential for impact on the safety factor and the physical factor, the potential for the need for structural changes, and the significant impact on the S factor. I can't think of words that would express that more seriously.
So you're saying to me that it was properly brought to the attention of the sponsoring board and that they should have been aware of the concerns?
Well, I can't think of words that would express more seriously a concern around emergency exiting other than the words risk of panic or crushing.
Okay. Just turning to the Casement Park Stadium Redevelopment Safety Technical Group report reviewed on the 4th of June 2013.
Page is that on?
Well, I have it 21 to...
Tab 3, I think.
That's it. Thank you.
21 perfect.
Sorry, the date is...
4th of 6/13 is the one that I'm looking at. It's with handwritten notes
Yes.
from somebody.
Yeah.
Who provided the handwritten notes?
I believe, having been a former colleague, that those are the handwritten notes of Carl Southern, the programme architect.
And there are a number of issues that are sort of a bit concerning in this I looked through, but one of them at the end is a note where he says, this appears to be, let's see if I can just find it. I note there the point that you said about potential for panic. But then, at the end, what I have is page 49. It says, the potential for the provision of an additional exiting route to the southeast corner of the venue should be explored. And there's a handwritten note that says explored but infeasible. What does that mean?
I don't know. I didn't write the note, but it would suggest to me that the department and/or the design team had explored using that existing exit, which I understand has been closed for quite some time, as a possible exit route in the event of an emergency, and for some reason had come to the conclusion that that was unfeasible.
So then below that it says there's an asterisk to deal with the same point, which says it suggests that full capacity may not be possible with the dash, and then unacceptable. So what interpretation would you put on that?
It would appear from that whoever wrote the note, which I believe was Carl Southern, believed that the report was unacceptable for whatever reason I can't imagine.
Sorry, just for information there, we are have put in motion some work to locate Carl Southern so that he can be brought to the committee. It hasn't been possible yet to locate him, but that work is ongoing.
Would be helpful. Could it just help me, because the timelines were a little bit difficult here, but in the opening statement you mentioned, although you couldn't substantiate, that Carl Southern had decided or had informed you that
Paul Scott.
That through Paul Scott, that the department no longer wished to be on the STG or to receive minutes or notes. Is that correct?
Yes, but they did wish to receive reports.
So how does that tie in with the timescale for this particular report?
In the opening remarks was the date of the... I don't know if you could find that, Andrew. Yes, in August 13, section 12, para 12, he can attend early meetings of the STG, but in August 13, Carl Southern advised that they were too busy. These were comments made in the 6/13.
So the
comments made on a report of the 6/13. The date in which they're handwritten, I don't know.
So the report was June 13. Mm-hmm. The comments were obviously sometime after
that. That's correct.
June 13.
That's correct.
And the indication that we have that Mr. Southern didn't wish to attend was in August 13.
That's correct.
So it is conceivable that Mr. Southern has got fed up with not getting the response that he wanted and has decided that he's not going to go anymore.
You have to ask Mr. Southern that.
But that I'm asking you, that wouldn't be an unreasonable question for me to ask Mr. Southern. I've one last question, because I know that the Chair won't other people come in, but he might let me come back if time permits. I want to talk about this issue of Antoinette McKeown, who was the Chief Executive, she wrote a letter to Peter May.
Email?
An email, yes. And she talked about issues affecting Casement Park, and she was quite insistent that DCAL colleagues' acceptance at Sport NI has provided consistent advice on these issues for some time now. Why did you feel the need to send that email?
I'm aware of comments being made that Sport and I had brought this issue up late in the day, and I think that was to address that. And that same point is brought up in a number of meetings with Antoinette, myself, Paul, Kieran McGurk, and Carl Southern. A series of meetings followed up by emails where the issue of consistent advice was accepted in those meetings by department officials.
Mr. Harkins, I just want to come back, and the final bit is just to check what that is from you, but just to finish this particular point, because I note that there is a return email, I think, from Peter May accepting that that there has been consistent advice, but declining to put Paul Scott on a particular committee. What is the significance of that?
Okay, there's been reference already to the Stadium Sponsor Board, which is the high-level board which oversees the development of each of the 3 stadia. Below that, there's a project board for each of the stadia projects, and that's chaired by a representative from each of the 3 sports. And at that, the high-level risk register would be considered for each project, each independent project. But below that, there's a steering group, which is a technical group. And it's a technical group which would be attended by engineers and architects who would be looking at technical matters to do the design and eventual construction of the site. So the reply gave the opportunity for Sport NI to have a representative at each of the steering groups. So
if we just fast forward, so that seems to me to be a downgrading of the position, but we'll check up with others. Can I just ask you, given that there is a very real problem going forward with the emergency evacuation plan, and that there are discussions about either new proposals or new plans coming forward, have the new plans, which I think are going to go in for August, have the STG or Sport NI been engaged with the in relation to the new proposals?
No.
Do you not find that rather strange?
Well, if you go to the last 2 sections of the table that I provided, in light of DCAL's presentation to the committee, I believe it was in January, there was confirmation that a new planning application was expected in August, and an indication that that was largely a similar application at that time, although I'm aware of recent media suggestions that it might be reduced. So at that time, I emailed the programme director in DCAL and said I was very keen to re-engage the STG in consideration of new plans, and that was an effort to make sure we don't end up in a similar position with safety concerns.
If we went back to Rosie Flanagan's original letter where they said that before there was sign-off that you would expect this to be consulted and agreed upon, would you not expect there to have been communication with the STG?
The plans that went in for Casement Park were not signed off by the STG in the same way as they were signed off for Windsor. So my concern at this stage of hearing that new plans were about to be submitted after the JR had made the old planning permission redundant was that the same thing might happen again. So that was my effort both in February and in May to try and ensure that the STG was re-engaged.
So, just last question, Chair. I just want to conclude on this point about we heard we were going to get independent advice on stadium design, and the clerk told us that unfortunately we couldn't get the person that we had wanted. Is there any independent authoritative body that could provide advice at relatively modest cost to the public purse?
Absolutely. My packet at tab 21 includes an exchange of emails and refers to conversations I had with Ruth Shaw, who was the then CEO of the Sports Ground Safety Authority, who have an English or a GB only remit, I'm not quite sure, but they would be the UK, if not the world authority on safety at sports grounds, and further to a meeting that Antoinette and myself had with the GAA on the 24th of October 14, where we offered to the GAA that we would attempt to secure the SGAS to review the plans. I made contact with Ruth Shaw, and she confirmed that she was willing to do that on a cost-only basis because they don't have a remit in Northern Ireland. They can't.
Cost-only means
I undertook that to mean it would be the cost of whatever flights, whatever hotels, and whatever direct, possibly a daily rate for salary rate for whatever. But it's a non-profit making organisation.
that might be somebody that we might want to consider.
Indeed, that's helpful. Could I just ask before I go to David Hilditch there? You mentioned in your papers, in Andrew's presentation there, about there's a formal transfer of the project from Sport NI to the department, and that took place on the 30th of April 2012. That's quite a significant move of responsibility and role from the Sport NI to the department. Was there any correspondence documentation around that transfer across?
Well, I know our chairman at the time wrote to the department in relation to the aspiration to expedite the project and the time risks that are associated with a project of this scale, and every capital project has a cost contingency, and the recommendation was that the project actually needed a sufficient time contingency to deal with the potential for such things as ground conditions, Japanese knotweed, planning challenges, procurement challenges. Those are the sorts of things that are typical in large capital projects that you can foresee they might happen, but you're not sure whether they're going to do. And certainly there were communications at that time about the risks to time. At the handover stage, the stadium team, which was in Sport NI, led by myself at the time, did a handover presentation to the new programme director, and I had written confirmation at that time that Noel Molloy was content with the handover and had all the information and files that he required to take the programme forward. I specifically contacted him at that time to ascertain that he was content with the handover.
It might be helpful to get a copy then. You mentioned there a letter from the then chairman, that would have been Dominic Walsh.
That's correct, yeah.
Of the letter from Dominic Walsh to the department at the handover, if that could be.
Well, I'll attempt to find it, but a lot of the files did transfer. So I will do my best to try and find it. Yeah.
And could I also, just in passing, thank you for the amount of material documentation that you've provided, and the speediness with which it was provided, which I think contrasts significantly with the delays that we're experiencing in getting material from the department. And also very helpful to have the summary that you provided there of those 6 pages that pick out the key points, because going through so many hundreds of pages can be very difficult. And you and those with you at Sport NI, and obviously others in the department, know this issue very intimately, so that's been extremely helpful. I want to put on record thanks for that. Next person would be David Hilditch.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for coming along this morning. I think it's been very helpful, the papers that have been produced, and certainly goes against some of the evidence which has been produced to date. From officials on the committee will have to make a few decisions as to how to proceed in relation to maybe bringing some people back to answer some of those questions. Certainly on the timelines. Indeed, there's actually some people in the opposite benches there as well. We're sort of leaning that way, have to refocus their attentions and questions. But certainly, there does appear to be reference throughout the table in the documents that are being provided, Mr. Harkness, in relation to some feedback, particularly from Cara Sullivan, in relation to rewording and the description of some things not being maybe the way it should be. Could you give us, I know Basil has touched upon some of the main points, but give us some indication of what your thoughts are on some of the feedback from Mr. Sullivan in relation to what was expected of Sport NI?
Well, key phrases that I've highlighted in the summary were about additional exits being explored and unfeasible, suggestions that full capacity may not be possible - unacceptable. Further, in relation to an email trail between Carl and Paul in September 13, there was a phrase that the report must be definitive in its endorsement. I presume that meant of the plans. I think that's what the discussion was. And in its present form is at odds with the department's requirements. In October 13, there was an email from Carl Southern to Paul after Paul had raised two major concerns, which were uncovered seating and emergency exiting, declining to meet, and said, we have met and I think we all know what the issues are. So that's a flavour of some of the comments. I leave others to draw conclusions, but that's a flavour of the comments made.
Certainly concerning, some of them, I have to say. The meeting of the 13th of February 2014, Antoinette McEwen attended for part of the meeting. Yourself and Paul Scott met with Kieran McBurkin.
Sorry, the date again, just to get
13th of February 14.
February 14.
And on your table to tab 12, I believe it could be. Could you just maybe give us a flavour, a run through? There's a number of bullet points there, which some matters have been raised before, and we haven't really. So we've got different answers from other officials who appeared before this inquiry started, I have to say, which will be interesting. But could you run us through some of those bullet points in relation to the discussion and your understanding of those bullet points?
The first bullet points really was about Sport Northern Ireland and Antoinette confirming from the officials that the advice had been given consistently, and that was accepted. There was also an acceptance from the DCAL officials that there had been a time imperative to secure planning permission, and other factors had the potential to upset that timeline, and that their focus had been entirely on achieving the planning permission within the anticipated timeline. They confirmed.
What does cost means?
Well, I think that was other issues at that stage hadn't been fully explored or bottomed out, and their view was that would be bottomed out later. There was confirmation and acceptance that there was an issue with emergency exiting, and again that was reassuring that the advice we had been given was in fact understood. We actually got plans out and rulers out and calculators out and the RAID guide out, and did some calculations around the scribbled notes about the shortfall in numbers for emergency exiting based on the advice in the RAID guide. There was confirmation that there was some exploration going on, that some of the exits need to be widened, and to achieve that there may be a requirement to acquire property in the area.
Sorry, just going back to that other point, Mr. Harkins, in relation to rulers and slides and numbers and whatnot, the lay persons like ourselves in the committee, was it down to being as close potentially as moving a bit here and a bit there, or what was being discovered? Was it quite substantial?
Well, the three exit, the plans that were emanating from the design team via the department at that time very clearly showed they have big red arrows on them where emergency exiting would happen, and those red arrows are over the top of narrow exits that would require to be widened. So the numbers are quite a bit smaller. And the follow-up letter that went to the department on the 17th of February, it summarised the discussions that we had. So that was just a few days. 4 days after the meeting. Yes. It summarised the three key opportunities that we had discussed to achieve emergency exit, which was: one was to increase the width of exits, two was to provide additional exits, and in particular the one we were looking at there was the exit to the southeast corner of the ground that actually has a gate on it, and the other is to maximise areas of relative safety within the ground. And I think Mr. Scott, in his presentation to the committee earlier, has described how people on the way to a place of safety are actually considered to be safe as long as they're moving at a certain rate. So if you could open up the concourses to a larger scale, then you could get more people moving, so they would be considered to be on a way moving at a certain rate to a place of relative safety. Therefore, they're counted in your safe numbers. So, but that would have required access to strips of garden, etc., to achieve that. Sorry, you were on those previous bullet points.
The property potential to buy houses in the area?
That was discussed, although it was discussed as a sensitive matter. And there was also just the option of strips of gardens that could open up the size of the concourses, which, as I've just described, would account to adding to or increasing the number of people who could safely be accommodated in the ground. So, and I'm not as technical as Paul Scott, so the details beyond that are not mine.
So it would appear that not only having sort of flagged up concerns or whatever from a very early stage, at least over a year ago, beyond, there was potential solutions being given from Sport NI.
That's correct. It's my view.
Thank you. Gordon Oliver McMullen.
Thank you, Chair. Morning.
Over.
The membership of the STGs, who selects the membership of that, or who selected the membership?
The membership was discussed with Owen Malloy, who was the programme director at the time, and then Sport NI would have gone to the relevant organisations and asked for appropriate representatives with the relevant skills and expertise.
You referred to the draft terms of reference for the STGs, which were circulated.
The new one, yeah.
Which were circulated on the 29th of April, 2015, I think. Was this the first time that Paul Scott was aware of these as evidence presented to the committee? It is clear that Sports and I were party to proposed changes. The structure of the STG, no?
No, the proposed changes emanated from a meeting that Antoinette and myself and our HR manager had with the department on the 12th of December 2014. They were discussed at that stage.
2014. Right. Is there any documentary evidence to support the allegation that DCAL no longer wished to attend STG
No,
meetings?
there's not. No, there's not. Apart from the fact that they no longer attended, so they did previously and then they didn't. So, but there's no email trail or letter trail to say that they no longer want to attend.
Should that not have been the case? Should there not have been a paper trail to support that?
Well, the paper trail is in the attendees of the subsequent meetings, and the fact that representatives aren't at the meeting is a paper trail, in my view.
I think we'll have the opportunity, Mr. Mullen, to question Carl Southern about this when he comes, if we can find him.
You said earlier on there, on the green book guide, there was opportunities to step outside the green book guide.
Well, the green guide is the equivalent guide in England, but for various reasons it was crossed the rail guide in Northern Ireland.
Say that again.
When it was rewritten for Northern Ireland, we felt it might be more appropriate to have a red guide in Northern Ireland.
But do we not have a red guide and a green guide here?
No. The green guide is the guide for GB, and when DCAL sponsored the Safety at Sports Grounds order, it was appropriate that Northern Ireland had a guide, so it was actually based on the green guide and updated because we were aware that further editions of the green guide were coming forward, so we were taking advantage of those edits and updates.
Yes.
So, but they're more or less the same. More or less the same. Yeah.
But there is room to stand outside them.
As long as there is equal or better safety provision than what would be provided by strict adherence to the guide.
And who would decide at the time?
Well, it eventually would be the District Council who would offer the safety certificate, because they're the ones responsible for confirming the safe capacity of the ground through a safety certificate and conditions attached.
So in this case here, it would be Belfast Council.
It'd be Belfast City Council who would eventually offer the safety certificate, but Belfast City Council, the same officers who would consider the safety certificate are the same officers who sit on the STG for Casement Park.
Right. And Roger, one more question, Chair. In preparations for the 4th of June 2004 City and Programme Board meeting,
4th of June.
Nick Harkness prepared a brief for the Sports NI Chief Executive in which 4 options were put. Why would Sports NI have considered the need to change?
Well, it's like any option appraisal. You consider a long list of options And at the end of the day, you consider that long list. It's like a business case. You consider a long list of options, some of which you know are irrelevant, and then you disregard them. So the idea to change advice was one of the options that was quickly discarded because you wouldn't do it. Your advice is your advice. And actually, the detailed reference referred to, you know, discussions with potentially the PSNI in relation to their advice, but you know that was immediately disregarded as a non-option.
Okay. And
Okay, thank you.
why would Sports NI have wished to consider, for example, an option to relocate the project?
It wouldn't be our decision to do that. No, this is again a long list of options, some of which would be disregarded. But in terms of where you are with making decisions about safety exit, you could in fact change your advice if you thought it was wrong. You could reduce the capacity. You could widen the exits, primarily by knocking down houses, or you could move somewhere else. It's just a long list of options, some of which will be unpalatable to a range of people for a range of reasons, but those are all options.
Yes, but would it, do you agree consistency would be a good thing in all of this here?
Well, absolutely, and I think the more recent meetings that Antoinette and myself had with DCAL officials confirmed that consistency of advice was what had emanated from Sport NI throughout our engagement on the project.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gordon Dunn.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in today. Could you maybe first of all clarify the role of the STG? Again, just for everyone's information. What was the role of it in relation to the Casement project?
It's in their opening. It was what was agreed at A to F on page 4 of the opening remarks. Design proposals would be drafted by the design team and would be forwarded to DCAL, who would in turn forward them to Sport NI. Sport NI would circulate the design proposals to the members of the STG. The STG would comment on the design, referencing it against the recognised guidance. The findings would be communicated to DCAL, who would pass them on to the design team, and the design team would make amendments. So it's an iterative process. So it's get plans, look at plans, comment on plans, get updated plans. So
Essentially, the STG advises on the safe design of the stadium.
Safe design, right.
Safe design.
And to be honest, you know, the meeting that you have or the note that you have is immediately redundant as soon as you have a new set of plans, because you hope that those have been accommodated in design changes.
So the drawings will be amended on an ongoing basis?
That's correct.
Yeah. So on the 8th of October 2012, Sport NI's Safety Compliance Unit Manager, who was that?
Paul Scott.
Paul Scott, right, received a letter from the then Permanent Secretary.
Yeah.
As we mentioned here, your input is valued and provides a level of comfort to the Department, ensuring that design development prior to submission of planning application.
That's correct.
Will ultimately be compliant with best practice and capable of achieving full spectator capacity. So we were told last week by the Acting Permanent Secretary, I believe, about that the planning permission had been received, and yet the design was an ongoing process.
Well, okay, so what basically happens is in a design build construction like this, you have an initial design team that bring the plans to planning permission stage. After that, then they go to a design and build team who bring their own design team, who can design in efficiencies, that can design in enhancements, but the original design team is often retained to protect the design integrity of the original design as almost light touch consultants, just as a touchstone. But designs develop beyond planning. If you're designing a house, you design it to planning application stage. Once you get it, then the architect brings it on to construction stage. So exact dimensions and exact finishes are included. That wouldn't be at the stage where it goes to planning application.
So, but had the STG then, had the STG a full, and had they full involvement right through to the planning stage?
They had referenced and created reports that continued to express concerns about emergency exiting in particular.
They had not signed off the plans.
They've not?
They had not.
The STG had not signed off the plans.
They had issued concerns that it may fail to achieve its full safe capacity.
So the plans that were approved by the planning authority, and obviously the other important thing that I think is is worth mentioning is all the other consultees that would be involved with the planning application. You know, were they fully involved in the planning process?
The consultation was entirely a matter that was disconnected from Sport NI. The consultation with local residents, etc., was a matter for.
There are a lot of other public bodies and government agencies that have to be consulted with.
Yeah. Well, in fairness, the ambulance service, the PSNI, and the fire and rescue service were all on the STG, so they had an opportunity to comment. But they were contributors to the reports that expressed concern about emergency exiting.
So just to summarise, the planning approval that went through and finally was challenged through the legal process. Are you satisfied that the STG were not fully involved to that level?
The STG was fully involved, but my view, and it's apparent from the ongoing concerns, is that the recommendations in the STG in terms of measures to provide sufficient emergency exiting weren't reflected in the design, and that wasn't bottomed out.
At that stage?
At that stage, prior to planning, in the same way that it was for Windsor.
It didn't follow the same procedure as Windsor, you say?
It
did not?
Well, the communication, they continued to receive plans, they continued to consider plans, but the STG were not content that emergency exiting could be adequately achieved with the plans as submitted and eventually approved and subsequently withdrawn.
Okay, just one other point. In relation to the capacity, could you clarify the planned capacity for the stadium as you understand it, that was approved by the planning authority?
That's 38,000.
38,000, right. And obviously there are games that continue there on a regular basis. What sort of numbers would be attending regular games?
The ground is in a state of disrepair.
Right, well, prior to that?
Well, I think that those were the subject of detailed debate at the judicial review, and I'm not entirely au fait with the content of that, but I understand in recent years the attendances have been significantly below that. However, there is evidence that says when you have a new stadium, there is a sparkle effect, and when it's much nicer and cleaner and more comfortable, then more people want to go. So those are well-known scenarios. So, but recent history, I believe, was detailed and discussed in detail at the JR, and I don't have all the detail of it.
Yeah. Your concerns were around the 38,000 capacity?
No, that's not
exit.
our concerns that in the event of an emergency, in particular an emergency in and around the Andersonstown Road, was about the emergency exiting of 38,000.
Yes.
Not per se 38,000. You know, it's about the emergency exiting.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
I'll be coming to Dominic in a moment. I'm just curious, in the presentation initially gave, there was reference there to the email that was circulated to members of the STG on the 29th of April 2015, paragraph 13 of Andrew's presentation. Can't quite put my hand on that at the moment, but could you tell me, who did that come from within?
That came...
In decal?
I think I may have a copy of it here. This is about the draft terms of reference.
Yes, we've got a thing that has terms of reference at the top, but it doesn't have the accompanying email. It looks like an attachment.
Bear with me. I had received a copy of it on Friday the 17th of April from Rory Muskelly. No, that was my response back on the drafts. I had received a draft of it from Rory Muskelly on Tuesday the 14th of April, and I had replied with some comments on it. So and that wasn't the date it was issued to Paul Scott, it was subsequent to that. I don't have that date with me.
So the correspondence and the to and froing around that terms of reference would have been with Rory Muskelly?
Yes, I had received copies and gone back with comments on it, and then subsequently on the 29th the final version was circulated to the members of the STG and to myself.
By Rory Muskelly?
I think it may have come from another official within the
Okay.
department.
All right. Would it be possible to find,
Yeah.
to get that?
Yeah.
I'd be grateful for that. Dominic Bradley.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
I just want to go to paragraph 12 there of your presentation. I don't have my tablet open here, so I don't know the page numbers. But you said in that page 16, the committee pack on page 5, I think, in your own number.
Yes, page para 12.
Yeah. In that, you said that the point of contact was Carl Sutherland, is that right?
That's
From
correct.
DCAL. And I believe his position within DCAL was that he was departmental architect.
That's
is that
correct,
right?
yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you consider that it was quite unusual for the departmental architect to withdraw from the safety and technical group, since he would be the person within the department most knowledgeable on technical and safety issues?
Well, he wasn't a member of the group from the outset. He was an observer, and that had been agreed with Noel Malloy. And on his decision to withdraw, my understanding of the conversation he had with Paul Scott is that he didn't require the notes, but he would require reports, and the reports were provided.
Well, it seems from that paragraph that he informed the safety and technical group that it could have autonomy to contact stakeholders.
Yes, originally the designs had been going as paragraphs A to F on page 4 suggests. The original agreement had been that all material would be issued through DCAL, and all comments would go back through DCAL. And again, my understanding was that as a result of pressures of work with the 3 big projects ongoing, that the department were content that we would receive the plans directly from the design team, and that comments could go back directly there.
Okay.
But the department would continue.
He
to
said he
see.
wasn't a member of the team, but he was the key person in the department, with expertise in safety and technical issues.
That's good, but in all honesty, I think it's appropriate that they're not full members, because the
No, I'm not arguing about
yes,
that.
I think the
But
independent.
he was the key person within the department with that expertise, and even though he was only an observer, he withdrew from the group on the basis that he was very busy and couldn't attend the meetings. Right? Okay, and he gave the group autonomy to contact the stakeholders, and he said then that he would accept reports as and when required. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Now, how many reports did he seek from the STG?
3 were provided, but I would point out that in and around that time, that's August 13, in September 13, my tab 5 illustrates on my table that Paul had obviously provided the report because Carl came back on September 13 and reported that the report must be definitive in its endorsement. On the 30th September 13, there was a Casement Park meeting, Sport NI, DCAL, Ulster Council of the GA and the design team were there. Paul Scott advised that meeting on the 30th of September that the management plan should be drafted as soon as practical. The unique nature of the site was an issue. The exiting arrangements were giving concern, especially if there's an incident on the Andersonstown Road, that concerns regarding the need for structural amendments may be required, and stress the need for emergency exiting. So I think it's clear that as the technical person in the department, that those communications were being provided to Carl.
Yes, I never said the contrary, nor was I suggesting that. It seems then from the paragraph 12 that there was a flurry of activity within the department around the end of April 2015. The department seemed to have left the STG.
April 15 or April 13?
April 15.
Okay.
this is paragraph 13. The department seems to have left this sort of tenuous arrangement between the architect and the STG in place. You say there were communications and issues were flagged up, but there seemed to be a flurry of activity from the department towards the end of April 2015 when the department circulated an email to members of the STG attaching draft terms of reference for the group, now signed off by DECAL for consideration at the next meeting. The correspondence also confirmed that DECAL Sports Branch will provide secretarial support to the STG, and the terms of reference proposed that the STG would be chaired by the DECAL Stadium Team Technical Officer. So previous to this, DECAL had withdrawn and left the STG more or less to its own devices. It was a sort of, maybe laissez-faire might be a good term. I think that means non-interference in the business of others. So the department seems to have left the STG in that position. And then suddenly there's a flurry of activity before the end of April when the terms of reference were provided, a secretariat was provided, and a chair was provided. So one wonders, you know, what precipitated that flurry of activity. It just happens to be the day before the chair of the STG, Paul Scott, gave evidence at this committee. So I'm just wondering, is there a connection between, as I said, the flurry of activity and the chair arriving at the committee here?
Well, certainly, first knowledge I had of plans to possibly restructure, repopulate the STG or manage in a different way were made known to me on the 12th of December 2014 at a meeting at DECAL, which related to some HR matters which Paul has referred to in this room. And around that time, obviously, there was around that time, the judicial review found that the plans were no longer, the planning permission was no longer valid, and obviously there was work going on to work out what to do next within the department. I can surmise in terms of a new planning application. In January, you got evidence that there was a new planning application coming forward that would be broadly the same. So, A, the meeting in December, B, the aspiration to move forward and submit a new planning application could have contributed to those reconsiderations, but I don't have all the detail as to the why.
You couldn't possibly comment.
It wouldn't be my place to comment.
Yeah. Did the judicial review participate those changes coming in?
I'm not aware of the judicial review. My knowledge of the judicial review is that it was based on, the findings were based more on the baseline attendance figures, and my understanding is when Judge Horner referred to safety, he confirmed that it was a separate matter and wasn't a planning matter. That's my understanding.
Whatever, I mean, there certainly was a sea change within the department in its attitude to the STG between August 2013 and April 2015. As I say, when previously there was a laissez-faire attitude to the STG and they were left largely to their own devices, and then suddenly there was almost a sort of clamp of control placed around it in the April 2015, the day before the evidence was given here. But anyway, the committee, I'm sure, will draw its own conclusions about that, and perhaps we'll get more detailed information from elsewhere. Thank you.
You make a very important point there in your question there, Dominic. Perhaps the question is better directed to the department, to ask them directly why there was such a flurry of activity. But just ask for information on the end of paragraph 13. The terms of reference proves the STG will be chaired by the DECAL Stadium Team Technical Officer. there are a whole series of changes of personnel. People come in, move out. We had a presentation at one stage, I think it was either the end of December last year or January this year, where Rory Muskelly and Kieran McGurk were in the room together at the presentation, and then people move, and it's very difficult for us to keep track of all that. So we will be asking, I think, for like a timeline of who was the permanent secretary at what point, who was the programme manager, or whatever the titles were, so we can get a clear understanding of that, because it is complex. But just on that particular one, would you happen to know who the Decal Stadium team technical officer is?
That's the new Carl Southern. I understand, who I understand is before you today. I can't
This is the gentleman that's coming with
Rory, I
Muskelly.
believe, yes. The name escapes me just at the
That's
moment.
good.
Andrew Dadley.
That's correct.
Dadley.
That's
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you. Rosie McCormick.
Gura Mayogri Caherly, and thanks very much for the presentation. There's just a number of points I suppose I want to explore. Just in your comments and in relation to the processes that were followed, and I mean, safety is the big concern, and I mean, when it was known and all of that, and that's the issue that's at the central hub of all of this. And do you think that there was a potential? Do you think the stadium could have been built without the safety concerns being addressed? Because I think that's what you were saying, that that there were attempts to sidestep safety concerns. So I just want to be clear about that. Do you think that could have happened? It could have proceeded?
Well, the truth of the matter is that Belfast City Council would have been required to give a safety certificate for any construction on the site. And, you know, I have no reason to believe that Belfast City Council officers would in any way give any inappropriate safety certificate. I have no concerns in that way. But I am aware of the fact that planning permission was due on in December 13, and there was a letter of intent to a contractor been through a procurement exercise for a design and build team, and the emergency exiting concerns of the STG had not yet been bottomed out in terms of, is the design accommodating the, and once you get planning permission, it locks down sort of the main footprint and height and some principles that are locked down, and if those were subsequently changed, you would have to go back to planning permission, which would obviously have a negative impact on timeline and spend, and with capital spend timelines being important matters. So if there's a risk, in my view, if there's a risk of any structural changes being required, it would be better to have those bottomed out at pre-planning application stage, so that once you get your planning application, you're not having to go back for structural changes.
Okay, you're saying it would be better, but are you saying that it's required and that something then was wrong?
Sorry,
and has this happened in other sort of...
Can you have another go at the question? I'm just not sure I'm getting it right.
It's really about, I'm trying to establish whether what you're suggesting was that this could have gone ahead and been built without safety concerns being addressed, because we got assurances last week, because I mean, I was very concerned, and I think other members obviously were concerned, that safety concerns are addressed. Those are paramount. And but I mean, you're trying to, I think, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I'm getting the impression that you're saying this could have gone ahead and been built without those being addressed.
Well, there was a letter of intent to a contractor on the first planning application and first planning approval around December 13, and the safety exiting concerns of the safety technical group had not yet been resolved.
Essentially, you could build a stadium for 38,000 people in this case, but when it comes to Belfast City Council certifying that stadium for its safe capacity, that number could be much lower. So you could end up with a stadium, I'm just using this by way of example, 38,000 capacity, but only 15,000 people ever allowed to be in that stadium.
And what would be the point in building?
And you end up with a white elephant.
But who would want to do that? Why would anybody want to do that?
It's non-compliant.
Exactly. No, that is the question.
You know, I mean, it's okay. That's okay. Can I just ask then about the process of planning and the safety process? Because what I've also felt and been led to believe is that these are dual processes, so that it's an ongoing process that concerns get addressed as part of the process. So, I mean, you've mentioned that throughout notes of various meetings, safety issues are on the agenda, and I mean, anybody would fully expect that. So, is it not the case just that safety concerns would be worked out as a matter of course, and then there'd be some point before sign off, like what we were told was before sign off on the design stage, that the safety concerns would have to be tied down? We were told it couldn't proceed.
This is a hugely challenging site to locate a £38,000 stadium. I'm not saying it can't be, but it's a hugely challenging site. And as far back as June 2010, in the outline business case, quote, the location will always be a challenge due to the large number of people discharging onto the Andersonstown Road. So that is a significant challenge on this site. And the view of the STG was that those challenges should be resolved at pre-planning application phase, so that the design submitted from planning can maximise the safe exiting. There is a danger that subsequent replanning could actually mean that some of your design work is nugatory, or it could mean, if construction had started, that if the resolution of these issues came at a later date, that some of your construction costs might be nugatory.
Thank you.
That's right.
Okay, not finished. So you've been involved with this project for how long?
I was involved in it from its outset in terms of I was looking after it along with the portfolio of other responsibilities up until it left Sport NI to go to the department, and that was on the 30th of April 2012.
Okay, and you know, we're talking here and you're telling us about the concerns, and how serious would you say that you're concerned with them?
Well, I'm not concerned that people are going to be put at risk, because there is a safety certification process.
Right, okay.
So you know, the stadium isn't built, and if it was built, there'll be a safety certification process. So, and I'm confident in Belfast City Council at issuing appropriate safety certificates, as they do for a range of venues across the city.
Okay. There's reference there to the letter from Rosalie Flanagan, but it's not in the pack.
Well, apologies, that can be provided. Yeah.
Right, okay. Is there any other documents not in the packet?
Well, there would be documents from when the stadium project was in Sport NI, but I have to say all the paper files and a lot of the electronic files were taken by the stadium team at that stage. So this is what I have provided is what I believe to be relevant to the questions that were discussed at the committee in recent meetings, which is about the chronology of communications between Sport and I. And it, you know, as the chairman mentioned earlier, it was prepared at a fairly short notice, but I can certainly provide the clerk with a copy of that letter.
That would be useful. Thank you. Also, just can I just explore a wee bit again? Whenever Carl Southern told you that he was no longer going to be attending the meetings, did you not think that that's something that should have raised concerns?
Well, the fact that we were continuing at that period to supply reports and have meetings, that was August 13, if I remember correctly, yes, and we were having meetings in September 13 with Carl, 30th of September 13 with Carl, the 8th of October 13 with Carl, the 16th of October with Carl. You know, there's an indication that the communications there were ongoing. He may not be at the meetings, but was certainly getting relevant information in my view.
Okay. There's also a reference to a conversation that you had with Cynthia, the SRO, at a Long Gallery event, and you raised concerns at that. When was that?
That was May, I believe, 20th of May. That was subsequent to Antoinette's letter, or email exchange with the Permanent Secretary, and meetings and conversations. Yeah.
And can you give us a flavour of that conversation?
The conversation in May, well, it was on the subject of a celebration event in the Long Gallery, and I took the opportunity to say that I felt that the safety, the emergency exiting concerns were not yet resolved, and that concern was ongoing.
So, Right, so you weren't raising it as a matter of huge concern?
Well, I was aware of previous correspondence with Antoinette and Peter May that had raised it at permanent secretary level, and I was taking the opportunity to reinforce that.
Okay, so how concerned were you then? I'll tell you why I'm asking this, because whenever Paul Scott came to the committee, that was the first time I knew that there were huge concerns to the point where a Hillsborough-type disaster was looming.
Okay,
And, I mean, it frightened me, to be honest.
The stadium isn't built, and the
So-
safety certificate hasn't been issued. So no one is at risk
Okay.
today or tomorrow. But you know, it is important in the view of the STG that I'm reflecting today, is that the programme should be designed in a way that it can provide for safe exiting for the number of people that it's designed to accommodate. So there's the physical accommodation, and then there's the safe capacity.
Okay.
And the obvious, in my view, and the view of the STG, is that the safe capacity and the physical capacity should be one and the same. And that's where we want to get to.
That's absolutely accepted. But that conversation then, was that, did you feel that was you had fulfilled your requirement to raise concerns, or did you follow that up with an email or a letter, or did you follow it up with anybody else in the department?
Well, I didn't subsequent to that, but I have to say I re-engaged when I became apparent that the new planning application was ongoing. I re-engaged with Rory Miskelly to say the STG need to be involved. I had attended a meeting on the 12th of December 14 with the department where technical issues were discussed around emergency exiting. I'd taken a talk to Kieran McGurk, who was the then project officer, in the 25th of July. So, you know, I had a range of engagements at a range of levels, but I have to say I was conscious of the fact that Noel Malloy was fully aware of the concerns in terms of the safe exiting.
But how official did you make all of these concerns? I suppose is there a paper trail of them?
Well, I made them aware to my chief executive, who emailed Peter May on the 18th of March, and from that communication it was apparent there were a range of discussions.
Okay, I'm just not convinced, I suppose, that because conversations are between maybe two people, and you'll have one person's view and another person's view, and we get this all the time. And as you're in your position and as a person with senior responsibility, you're part of the sponsor board as well. I'm just wondering, how official did you make your concerns known that there were safety?
Well, subsequent to that, I brought a presentation to the Board of Sport Northern Ireland, and Paul Scott attended that presentation, and it highlighted the concern of uncovered seating, sufficient numbers of exits and outer circulation area as concerns, and the need for emergency exiting had not been provided. The need for an emergency exiting strategy that had not yet been provided.
But was that any different from those appearing as normal agenda items, or was this elevated to a serious concern level?
Well, I subsequently had a conversation from Kieran McGurk on the 25th of July 14 that matters in Casement Park will not progress until the GAA have provided decal with an emergency exiting plan. That was confirmation from the department that it was not going ahead. I also referred to, I don't know the detail of it, but a dispute between the GAA and the design and build contractor that had stopped payments being issued, and apparently that had stopped work on the emergency exiting plan. But I'd got confirmation directly from a department official that matters in Casement Park will not progress until the GAA provide decal with an emergency exiting plan.
Okay. Is there a current safety certificate for Casement Park?
The ground is closed.
Okay, no, but I'm just asking.
I don't know. If there is, it's redundant because the ground can't be used.
Would you know what the last one was, or what the capacity was?
I imagine it's in the 20s, but I don't know.
You
don't have the detail of that.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
That's a good.
Leslie Craig.
Thanks, Chair. Morning, gentlemen, and thank you for your evidence so far. In tab 4, we are told that's the 10th of May of 2013. The plan, and I think Mr. Harkinson referred to it, was to demolish houses in Owen Vara Park for emergency exiting?
Well, the arrows on that plan are overlaid on top of, the exiting arrows are overlaid on the top of properties, and there are
We have that.
Have a copy of that?
yes, assumed new boundary lines which are over the top of property, so
No,
I
I
can
have
only
that.
imagine that could be achieved with demolition.
Now, it also says in that tab that this clearly shows that all parties knew of the need to increase emergency exiting arrangements from as far back as May 2013. So it's not something come out of the air, as it were. In tab 7, it clearly identifies two major, and I quote, areas of concern: uncovered seating and emergency exiting. In tab 14, there's a report to the decal. I'm not just sure what this is. Safety and Sports Grounds Monitoring Group.
That's right.
Is that an important?
Yes, because decal are the sponsors of the Safety and Sports Grounds legislation, they convene a meeting twice a year with Sport NI, at which the accounting officer and the technical officer attend to feedback on the implementation of that legislation in terms of are ground owners complying, are the district councils effectively delivering the certification process, etc.
Right, so that's an important.
Yes, but it's separate to stadium development, and it's not, yeah.
But at that, and that was in March 2014, if I'm correct, it does state that STG, the Safety Technical Group, has been requesting emergency exiting plans since the spring of 2013.
That's correct. That's what the report states.
They still haven't appeared.
Correct.
If you go on to tab 15, 16, there is confirmation there of previous conversations a while ago, and this is where the issues are affecting safety at Casement Park had the potential to cause delays. Was this a warning, do you think, to the department, or an acknowledgement of the fact?
I don't know. I didn't write the note, so but it does refer to, as you say, previous conversations and issues affecting Casement Park. Later on, it does talk about potential for risk in this critical area of responsibility.
Yeah. Really reference to Mr. Southern, you know, in the two major areas again, saying that we have met and I think we all know what the issues are. Is that not, it's your opinion, is that not a bit blasé?
I understand that was in relation to an invitation from Mr. Scott to meet with Carl and others to consider options to resolve those issues.
Right. On tab 19, which has taken us now 23rd of June last year, the design proposals include deviations from recognised guidance. Of course, one of them, failing to provide sufficient numbers of exits at suitable locations. So again, exiting has been flagged up as a major and unresolved issue.
That was a presentation to the Sport NI board rather than a presentation to DECAL now. So in terms of that.
Would that board not report to DECAL and to the Minister?
Well, they do report, yeah.
So it would seem reasonable that the Minister should have been told.
The truth of the matter is that that issue then was added to the Sport NI risk register and considered on the 27th of January. The stadium programme is not a Sport NI programme, it is a DECAL programme. Paul, as one of a range of duties that he has in relation to the implementation of the Safe Sports Grounds legislation, advises and convenes the STG and advises on safety compliance matters in relation to the stadium. The board considered that in relation to the risk to relationships at its meeting on the 27th of January, but decided that the health and safety risk belonged to DECAL and the Ulster Council. They felt that the risk to relationships was such a low-level matter in comparison to the risk of safety, and decided that Sport NI should continue to give the appropriate advice irrespective of whether that relationship issue was a reality or not.
Okay. And finally, tab 22 there, have the reference to the meeting. Staff concerns and treatment, past and future, were the main topic of the meeting. Interesting. But Of particular relevance, technical discussion developed on the matter of concern re emergency exiting with Rory Muskelly, arguing that this could be dealt with during construction. Now, I find this absolutely amazing. Is it not true that safety has to be designed in from the start? There's only a fool would build something and then try and apply for a certificate and find out they could only be allowed half the numbers they had planned for. Is it not a fact that safety has to be designed in?
Well, I think it's illustrated if you go back to Rosalie Flanagan's letter about Windsor Park and about confirming the contentment of the STG prior to a plan be submitting for planning application. I think there's a principle set there.
Yeah, but I think maybe push on a bit more. I mean, different world. I used to be involved a little bit in that sort of area. But it would have been a cardinal sin to have left something like safety to the end. And in fact, could be, as actually refers to Rory Muskelly, arguing that that could be dealt with during construction. Is that not at the least naive?
Well, I think that is particularly relevant to the development of a safety exiting plan. And I think, as the STG has repeatedly said, on such a challenging site, having a safety exiting plan which can illustrate that that number of people can come out safely within the required timescale, it's important, in the view of the STG, to bottom that out before designs are locked and applied for planning permission, never mind construction.
Karen McKevitt.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to touch a wee bit more on that, following on from Mr. Cree. The design's not signed off yet, is it?
There is no design at the minute that I've seen.
But it never was signed off. So anything internally or anything going on within casement could still be changed because it never was signed off. I think
it was signed off by the department to go for planning.
No, that's different. But design and build, I mean, so once when you go into a couple of different stages within an application, in order for you to spend public money, you go into design and to see if it'll fit in and to see if plan permission. Once plan permission is granted, then you go into design and build. The design and build, as I understand, design and build then takes in a more detailed plan from outline planning for the stadium that was granted, so that you take in emergency exits and stuff. Is that right?
When planning permission is granted,
yes,
some aspects of the plans are then locked down in that, like its footprint,
like
its shape, like its no. The red line is just the development line. Its shape, its height, the significant measurements are all locked down.
Yeah.
And if you subsequently need to change some of those big measurements, you would have to go back for planning and go through consultation, and that has the potential to require redesign and a new planning application.
Oh, I understand that.
Yes.
No, I understand that. But then the detail for when a design team was organised, you would assume that some detail and discussion would have taken place on health and safety issues, like the width of exit onto Anderson's Town Road, how many it would fit in. Surely that was taken into consideration.
Can I explain? You know, the concourses within a sports ground are a bit like a river, right? And high up in a river, it's very narrow and there's very little water in it. But as tributaries arrive, the river gets wider and wider and wider. So, and that's to accommodate the volume of the water. In the same way the concourses in the stadium get wider towards the exits, because more people come out of the stand join it, so they need to keep the flow rates going, those need to get wider. If, for example, the emergency exiting plan identified that there was a need to use the exit at the southeast corner of the ground, that's the opposite end to the Anderson's Town Road. So you would, in potential, if you decided to use that, if that was one of the outworkings of an emergency exiting plan, you would need to design. You couldn't put people back through the river going to the narrow end because you would create panic and crushing. So on such a challenging site, it would appear sensible to work out the emergency exiting flows and the flows of people around the ground in the event of an urgency and design those in so that you don't have narrowing concourses with people going through it. That's one example.
In your opinion, was that done?
No.
Okay. You spoke about the JR and the capacity earlier on. Was that a factor in the judgment?
My understanding from reading BBC reports is that the judge made a comment that safety was an issue outside of the planning consideration. Now that's only my understanding, and that's from the media reports that I read around it.
It's outside a planning matter.
That's what I understand. Yes.
Okay, so, but yet and all, then the design of an application or the stadium and the safety, we're looking at to join together. But it's my understanding that Belfast City Council sign off it separately. They don't have anything to do really with the process. Yes, they do in terms of conversations along the way before health and safety certificates issued. But that could be as late as looking at Windsor Park. They only had theirs issued 2 weeks prior
in order,
to opening.
Sorry, beg your pardon.
Okay, go on ahead.
In order to maximise the likelihood of a safety certificate that reflected the physical capacity of the ground as being the safe capacity, Belfast City Council officers were invited to be on the STG. The idea being that once the plans were considered and approved by the STG, the people likely to be responsible for issuing a safety certificate were already content that the safe capacity would match the physical capacity.
Okay. There was talk of a management plan. Would that be the case in a lot of applications or a lot from stadiums?
Well, an element of the management plan would be emergency exiting. It would be like a chapter within the management plan. So you obviously have to have crowd management plans in normal circumstances. Yep. And it would reinforce the view, as I understand of the STG, is that the stadium works in normal circumstances to its current design or its former design. But the big issue basically is in an emergency, and the management plan would contain plans for dealing with an emergency, a range of emergencies.
Okay, my understanding was that the certificate from Belfast City Council that was issued and used in the past was for a capacity of 32,000. You said you didn't know. You thought it was.
I don't know the answer to that.
I thought it was 32,000. You know.
I don't know the answer to that.
Just wanted to. I think that's what it was from previous presentations. That was made. Do you think that, in your opinion, Nick, do you think that exiting strategy can be accommodated?
I'm not a technical person, and a Sport NI relying on the STG, as in chaired by Paul Scott, contributions from the PSNI, contributions from the Ambulance and Fire and Rescue Service and Belfast City Council. I'm content that compliance with the opinion of that group is likely to maximise the chance of a safe capacity matching the physical capacity of the ground.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Just in respect of the question that Karen asked there, we had Rory Muskilly, Kieran McGurk and Stephen Traynor with us on the 11th of December 14. In the course of that was 4 days before the final judgment in the judicial review. Rory Muskilly said, in the anticipation that they would get a positive outcome from the judicial review, he said construction work then starts in January. Taking the Christmas holidays out of it, there wouldn't have been much done in terms of changing the building between the 11th of December stroke 15th of December and diggers on the ground in January. So it was obviously the case that the intention was at that point, from Rory Muskilly's information that he gave us, that they were intending to start work before the scheme had been amended to take account of all of the.
Can I just say that there's no guarantee that physical amendments would be required, but what we need is an emergency exiting plan that considers all the flows and all the people flows and all the issues.
Thank you. Yeah, difficulty for some of us is the terminology and all of these things. You folks have, the correct terminology and so on. We're not always quite spot on there. We've got 4 more people here. I want to come back. Cathal.
Thanks, Chair, for letting me back in again. Isn't it the case like that in January 2015, the board decided that safety matters weren't an issue for them, and it's not indicated that Sport NI will take a more passive role and avoiding any real accountability?
presentation to the board happened in June 14, and one of the decisions at that stage was that the board asked to be kept informed and to treat as a corporate risk. The issue was then put on the corporate risk register, but since Sport NI doesn't manage the programme, doesn't fund the programme, you know, we give advice on the programme. It went forward, and the advice was continuing to be given, as can be illustrated on the events between those dates. It was on our risk register as a relationship risk. The board considered this in detail, and they considered that the health and safety risk belongs to DCAL and the Ulster Council. They considered that the relationship risk was not relevant in these matters and should not be a consideration, and that SNI should continue to give the appropriate health and safety advice irrespective of relationship considerations, and they therefore decided to remove the risk.
And the board sought assurance from officers at that meeting that the appropriate advices were being given to DCAL, and that assurance was provided to the board.
So you wash your hands off it, is that really?
I think that's...
those are your words.
Okay, Chair, okay.
Inappropriate.
Just in terms of any evidence given to the SRO, was there ever a formal question ever submitted to her regarding the serious safety concerns, to the extent that they were raised here by Paul Scott? Was there any formal correspondence at any point?
No formal correspondence with the SRO, but I would refer the members back to the correspondence between Antoinette McKeown and Peter May on the 18th of March and his reply on the 28th.
What tab?
Would that,
That's at tab 1516.
you not find that a bit unusual that the SRO was not copied in, that even to any correspondence regarding serious safety concerns?
Well, in Peter May's response, he confirms that he's been in consultation with the stadium team on the matter, and I would assume that would include the SRO.
But no formal written correspondence of that nature?
Not to Cynthia on the matter, but to Peter May.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
So it went to the permanent secretary at the very top of the department?
That's it. Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Basil?
Have any stadiums been built recently where the build capacity is greater than the safety certificate capacity?
Not aware of any.
Has there been any concern raised about the Ulster Rugby Stadium, about the capacity issues there?
My knowledge of it is that Ulster Rugby have a safety certificate for 18,000, but it hasn't been populated to that level. It's been populated to around 16 or 16 and a half.
Okay. Is it possible, just to be clear, because there's this, I just want to take time just to get this straight in my mind. There are two processes. One is the planning process and the other is the safety process.
Certification process.
Although these are two parallel processes, it would be usual to consider in the first instance if the safety certificate is likely to stand some chance of being granted. Would that be correct?
That's certainly the inference within the former Permanent Secretary's letter.
So the reason why that would be the case would be what? Why would you want to check your emergency exiting safety certificate scheme, even though you don't have to do it until the last minute?
Okay, so it's apparent that an emergency exiting plan wasn't developed from Ravenhill until later in the day, and that was a result of the fact that there was high level of confidence within the STG that the layout of the ground and the layout of the exits and the road infrastructure away from that could accommodate an emergency easily, and that a safety management plan would illustrate that. On this case, right as far back as June 2010, there was an illustration of the challenging nature of this site, and that concern wasn't alleviated in any way by the emanating plans. At one stage, the plans showed widening exits and using an exit at the southeast corner to get people away in an emergency. And to some degree, there was a level of confidence that this matter is being dealt with in those.
So what are the unique characteristics of the Casement Park proposition that make it different from Ulster Rugby, for example?
Is the lack of circulation space around the ground, the number of exits and the constriction that exists in the exits other than the exits onto the Andersonstown Road.
And that is due to the number of houses that actually back onto the perimeter of the
So no matter what stadium you're going to build there, you are going to have serious challenges about emergency exiting schemes.
It's a challenging site. And that's it's not an impossible site, it's a challenging site.
Okay, so and I understand that the issue really is that some 75% of people were expected to entrance and exit through the Andersonstown Road facilities, and if they were not available, then you would have a problem. So you put in your pack here some plans that are stamped with the GAA, which shows increased flows. This is this document here.
That's correct, yeah.
But those flows indicate that you would have to knock down some houses.
That's that design at that time, yes.
Okay. If you were to go through that type of exercise, so because one way of resolving this is to have more exiting at the bottom end of the stadium, would you have to redesign the plans for the stadium itself?
Yes, as I explained earlier, if you're going to have reverse the flow of people through a concourse, you can't reverse flow them into a concourse that declines or narrows in its width.
So just to be clear, you're saying it is significant that although you can have an expanding funnel, in other words, as you go further down, if it's wider, that's okay. In fact, it's a good thing.
Yep.
Especially
as more people arrive. Yep.
If you have to go the other way because you have to exit from the opposite end, your funnel actually becomes a negative because it leads to crushing.
Construction, yes.
So any new plan that's been brought forward, that's talked about for now, for August or whenever, even if it were to adopt the different emergency exiting schemes outlaid in this, would need to have some redesign work done to account for flows and widening or narrowing of the concourse.
I believe that's likely, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Oliver?
Yes, thank you, and thanks for that, Mr. Chair. You state in the minutes and reports of STG meetings in 2013 that were provided to DCAL repeatedly raised concerns about the potential of crushing. How many of these notes or reports is this specifically mentioned? And how much has been specifically mentioned on Casement Park, or was it a generic?
No, this was specific to the emergency exiting sections of the reports to do with Casement Park.
Yeah, and nothing else?
That's correct.
Right. On the Green Book, we did talk about stepping outside it and etc. How many times did we step outside the Green Book?
I wouldn't have the detail of the technical compliance of the Green Book on how many, but emergency exiting and uncovered seating and outside circulations, perimeter circulation space are three significant deviations from the Red Guide.
Yes. So when these plans were put in, did Belfast Council see the plans?
That's correct, yes. They did.
through their membership.
Through the membership of the STG.
And were they happy with them going forward to planning?
No, they contributed to the reports that had raised the concerns as summarised at the bottom of page 1, tab 3 on my summary. They contributed to those concerns.
And did they specifically say in that there that they didn't like to see the plans going forward?
It wasn't the STG's decision as to when and if the plans go forward. They're asked for a reference to a reference point in relation to compliance with the Red Guide or not.
Sorry, the Red Guide?
The Red Guide, yes. That's the Northern Ireland Guide's the Red Guide.
Okay.
The Green Guide's the GB Guide.
So we don't go with the green guide then.
The green guide was what the red guide was based on. The green guide existed beforehand, and the red guide was developed in relation to the legislation in Northern Ireland.
So we only deal with the red guide, not
Red guide is the guide that's relevant to Northern Ireland, that's correct. But it is based primarily on the contents of the green guide. And it's updated, actually.
We don't need the green guide.
That's correct.
Right, okay.
The red guide is the relevant one here.
Right. So anywhere along the line did Belfast Council raise concerns about this going forward for planning?
Belfast City Council were part of the STG that, in summary, requested an emergency exiting strategy as soon as practicable to be submitted to the STG for comment. Made comments that there was the potential for crushing with the current design in the event of an emergency. Consideration should be given to the provision of an additional emergency exit. Emergency exit have the potential to impact on the S factor and safe factor and P factor, therefore the safe capacity of the ground. They were part of the group that considered that and gave those opinions.
Yes. But nowhere did it say planning shouldn't go ahead.
Is that not their role?
I think the point that's been made there by Mr McRae is important. We can't expect the City Council to do somebody else's work for them.
No,
it's the applicants who make the application.
Yes,
they're the people who make the decision.
This is what we're trying. This is what we're trying to tease out here. You know, Chair.
City Council
I do
was an
appreciate
applicant.
that. But any changes, as Basil was talking about the changes to the plans, this widening out and all, that's got to do with the flow time.
It's got to do with the flow time, but it's also, you can't just, well, the point I'm making is you just can't decide later in the day that you're going to use the exit in the southeast corner in the event of an emergency. There's a very steep bank to it, so that would need to be designed in terms of a ramp or steps or whatever, but as well as that, the flows to get to that need to be designed in. You just can't decide after a plan is locked down to reverse the flows of people. That doesn't work.
So would it be a fair assumption that the original plans were flawed, that this flow time wasn't correct? Because of what you said there, Belfast City Council raised those concerns on the numbers going out into the concourses, etc. So therefore your flow time...
The flow time worked in normal circumstances.
No.
That's
but
correct.
the flow time on the original drawing would have been flawed then.
The STG had not signed off the plans that were submitted for planning.
So then the original plans are flawed.
There is no. The truth of the matter, there is no safety management plans which illustrates whether they're flawed or not. The STG have come to the conclusion that they can't see how a safety management plan would get people out in 8 minutes in the event of an emergency close to the Andersonstown Road. But, I think the STG, in my view, we're stepping back and saying, there may be something we haven't thought about here, there may be some imaginative way that we haven't come up with, maybe the design team have some other way. Set it on a piece of paper and let us consider it, and then we'll get our slide rules and our calculators out and we'll work it out. But that, since being asked for, was as far back as 2013, that has never appeared, so that work can't be done. So maybe there is a magic wand somewhere that'll make it work, but it hasn't been brought out from under the table yet.
But surely the words maybe and might do not come into safety. This is the whole point of this here. The original drawings that were put in for planning did not have the proper flow times in them.
In an event of an emergency, I've no evidence to say that they have the correct flow times.
Sorry?
In the event of an emergency in the Andersonstown Road, the STG is not confident and has no evidence to conclude that the flow times would be appropriate. No evidence to suggest that.
Okay. So, flawed plans are put forward?
Well, there's no evidence that unflawed plans have been put forward.
Yeah.
It's slightly different.
Well then, do you agree then that part of this system that we are looking at today, the whole system of this, putting stadiums forward for planning, for safety, there's part of this system is flawed and needs to be looked at for the future?
Fair point.
That's the point I'm making.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would you agree to that?
Well, I think the indication at the early stage from Rosalie Flanagan that the department would sign off the plans for submission to planning permission only when the STG was content is an important and a valuable principle to apply.
Yes. So I think if anything comes out of this inquiry, this could be one of the main things that this system that we have of going forward with plans for a stadium, that then the whole that we need to look at the system, because we're some of the cases here and parts of it, the cart's going before the horse.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. The final questions from Gordon.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much, gentlemen. It's been very informative. I think Oliver's covered most of it. Andrew, you haven't said an awful lot, but you've mentioned this a couple of times in relation to the drawings that we've got full planning permission for Casement Park. It is the case, and just one clarification, that the STG as a group, not the STG group that have been working on the project, did not sign off the plans prior to submission to the planning service for approval. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Why was that? Just
because they had not been provided with any emergency exiting plan that they could assess as being compliant with the Red Book.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Again, to thank you for your presentation today and the answers to the questions, and for the paperwork that was provided. That material there between pages 19 and 24 of our documentation there, the detailed timeline of all of the exchanges with the department, has been extremely helpful, and makes it absolutely clear, I think, that the issue of emergency exiting was one that Sport NI was raising repeatedly throughout the process. The question we have then to find out elsewhere is, were people listening? Thank you. That's been excellent.
Thank you, Chairman.
Could I say to members now, we are totally at odds with our time plan at the start of the day. We're an hour behind. But I'm going to do two things here. First of all, suggest a change of timeline here, and apologise to Peter May in regard to that. What we're hoping is that we take a 15-minute break now, rather than originally intended at 12:30. We'll have an hour then with Peter May, hopefully, of questioning, and then after that it would be Rory Muskelly. Okay. So if members are happy enough that we take the break at this point, just a 15-minute comfort break, adjourn for 15 minutes for comfort break and lunch, and then immediately after that, at about 25 we'll start again.
Committee room 30. Committee room.
Those will join us in a moment or two. And at this session we have Peter May with us, who was for
interim permanent secretary.
Interim, I think is the term. Former DCAL interim permanent secretary. And I invite you now to, I think members have already declared any relevant financial or other interest in relation to today's business. We'll take it as read. That carries on from the earlier session this morning. If you want to make an opening statement, Mr. May, and then we'll come with questions after that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm only going to say a few words by way of introduction, because I think the main purpose is to answer your questions. Perhaps I could just make one point at the beginning. I'm conscious, from having listened to your earlier discussions, you have access to many papers. I've access only to a few, and if you want to ask me questions about the detail of individual papers, if you could show me the paper you're asking me about, just so that I can refresh my memory if I saw it in the first instance and so on, that would be kind. Thank you. In terms of my role, I was Interim Permanent Secretary and Accounting Officer for DCAL from May 2013 to November 2014. In my role, I attended steering group meetings and chaired those meetings of the steering group the Minister was unable to attend. I also attended a number of programme board meetings which were designed to keep an oversight of the progress being made and the key issues faced. I would also have had a key part to play in respect of the spending of public money in my accounting officer role, so I would have signed those funding agreements with governing bodies agreed during my time as Interim Permanent Secretary, and I would have had a key role in agreeing to the implementation of various stages of the contracts, the pre-construction notice and construction notice for contracts, for example, for the building of stadia. I think while I understand the focus of this inquiry is on emergency exiting and safety, it is just worth reflecting that there were a wide range of issues facing this programme, all of which were being addressed at the one time. And the committee understandably wants to focus in on the one particular issue, but I think it is important to retain a recognition of the wider issues. So, particularly during 2013 and early 2014, for example, there would have been a major preoccupation around the legal challenge that Crusaders were taking and the state aids issue. There were ongoing issues, which particularly during late 2013 and early 2014, about the community acceptability of Casement Park and the Planning Commission and so on. And those, I think it's important to recognise that those were all taking place alongside consideration of this issue. Safety was an essential part of the programme. Without the realistic prospect of achieving the safety at sports ground compliance, there would have been no purpose in building the stadium. And clearly, as a counting officer, it would be inexcusable to build a stadium to one capacity when it could hold many fewer. The funding agreement, the tender documentation, and so on, all to varying extents set out the expectation that all the statutory requirements would be met. And in the case of the tender documentation, actually specifies that the stadium needs to be capable of achieving that compliance. Certainly, in my role, I was conscious that these were the first stadia that had been built in Northern Ireland for a significant period of time, certainly of the scale. In the case of Casement, the largest ever that had been attempted to be built. Clearly, that's why it was important to take great care in the management of the programme and ensure through the procurement process that the successful tenderer had widespread expertise in delivering stadia of that scale elsewhere, because clearly in the work they were going to do in designing Casement, it was important that they would understand what was required to meet, whether it be the Green or in our case the Red Book standards. So I'm very happy to do my best to respond to your questions. As I said, I don't necessarily have an encyclopedic set of papers with me to be able to go into the nth degree of detail, but I'll do my best.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned there that you started in May 13, and I missed the month that you finished in 14.
November 14.
November 14, thank you. When you came into the department in May 2013, Rosalie Flanagan had been the permanent secretary prior to that and had retired at that point. When you took over, how were you briefed about this issue of emergency exiting when you came into the department? Was that part of a first day brief or
I would have had an extensive first day brief covering all of the work of the department, and there would certainly have been, I don't have it, I haven't refreshed my memory on it, but my suspicion or belief is that there would have been some quite detailed material around the progress on the three stadia, but the specific issue of emergency exit and Casement would not have been part of that. At that time, I think it was not an issue that was being flagged as being central to the work of the programme. It was seen very much as something that needed to be done, but there wasn't a sense that it had become a potential obstacle to achievement of the programme, is my recollection at that stage.
Okay. Because when we look back there, the STG minutes and reports were going into the system. Prior to that, if we go back there to an email there from Carl Southern to Paul Scott, I appreciate the fact you have it in front of you, but in that, Carl Southern acknowledged the issues on the 5th of March 2013, and then again STG minutes and reports during 13, and then on the 10th of May the populist plans appeared on the scene and showed the possibility of a need for demolishing houses to have access and egress. And I accept then it's really in September that there seems to be an increase in activity with This is based on the papers we received from Sport NI, September 13, 30th of September 13, 9th of October. So it's a little bit later on that it really takes off. But that's during...
Well, I've given you my recollection, Chair. As I said, I haven't gone back over the first day briefing I did receive. I can't guarantee there wasn't a reference to it. You have to remember the first day briefing would have covered progress against all three of the stadia and would have gone into a number of the most current issues. The fact that there was what at that time probably would have been seen as a relatively much a technical issue that was being raised and being addressed through the normal programme mechanisms may well mean that, I mean, I think quite understandably it wouldn't have been elevated in the context of a first day briefing.
When was it first flagged up to you and brought to your attention?
I've tried to remember when that was, Chair, and I can't remember precise dates. I think it would have been towards the end of 2013. I would have received very regular updates from the programme team and the SRO, often on a very informal basis. They would have called up or I would have called down to them, once or twice a week just to see how things were going. And in the course of one of those conversations, I'm sure they would have begun to mention the fact that there was this issue that was being addressed and needed to be resolved. But I don't have a specific date, and I doubt there was a piece of paper that was the first time it was raised with me. It was almost part of it was certainly part of an oral sort of iterative process of my keeping in touch with how the programme was developing.
Can you recall any conversations you had with the Minister about this particular issue?
I don't recall having specific conversations with her about it. She too would have received directly briefings from the programme team on a regular basis. I wasn't present for probably the majority of those. We know, and I've reminded myself of some of the steering group minutes, so what's clear is that throughout 2014, from December 2013 onwards through 2014, there were references being made in the steering group meetings to emergency exiting as one of a number of issues that needed to be resolved. But I think that is very much the way in which I still saw that issue during my time, that this was one of a number of issues that needed to be resolved. Clearly, safety is very important. It's a sort of sine qua non for the programme, but it wasn't being given the prominence which perhaps some have suggested it had at that time, in my view.
The reason I'm raising that is that at that period, October 13, December 13, a number of things, then January 14, there's a period there where there was a higher level of exchanges of information.
Yes, and it certainly would have come to my notice, as I said, I think probably sometime around late 2013, and I would have been aware of the fact that, as I understood it, the issue was that the stadium was able to be exited in a normal emergency. The issue came with scenarios that could be applied as to different sorts of emergency that might apply. Certainly, not being a technical expert, but believing part of my role was to ask sort of sensible questions, I wanted to be clear that those scenarios were properly presented and were the sorts of scenarios that would apply to sports grounds elsewhere as well as here, because closing all of the Andersonstown Road would be it would take a very significant act. It's a very long stretch. I passed the stadium just the other day and reminding myself of the scale of what it would take in order to close every exit onto the Andersonstown Road, for instance. But as I say, I'm not a safety expert. I was rather just trying to make sure that a way was found to resolve the issues and to make sure that we were in a position to deliver against the programme for government commitment in a way which both met statutory, including safety, but also was within the budget that was set by the executive.
And you would have attended the sponsor board meetings?
Yes, and indeed I chaired some of them in the Minister's absence.
Okay. There was only, we only have the minutes of one of those meetings. I understand we've requested the minutes of the other sponsor board meetings. They're just the one that came through from Sport NI. But I noticed that that particular one, there was mention of the presence at the meeting of the Minister of SPAD, Jarlath Kearney, who welcomed everyone, it says, to the meeting. Did he attend many of those meetings?
I think so, but I don't have a full suite of... and I think it was quite normal for him to attend most of the meetings until he left his role.
And Did you have any conversations or exchanges with Jarlath Kearney in regard to Casement Park?
I'm sure there would have been discussions in regard to Casement Park. I don't recall any specifically to do with emergency exiting.
Right, so it's not an issue that he ever raised with you?
Not to my recollection.
Okay. First, Catherine Hushin.
Mr. Chair, Peter, as the last question I raised with Nick Harkness there of Sport NI, was there ever a formal question in writing regarding the serious safety issues as raised by Paul Scott? Was that ever sent to the SRO? And his reply, no, but it was sent to you.
Well,
what was the nature of that there and the content of that?
I think you have an email exchange between Antoinette McEwen and myself. The first email from Antoinette on the 18th of March and my reply on the 28th. So it starts by saying, hi Peter, we spoke a while ago in relation to problem solving on issues affecting safety at Casement Park. And as I recall, I'd had a conversation with her in which I'd flagged the fact that the STG were raising concerns and the need for us to find a way of solving those problems together. And she was responding, helpfully, I think, suggesting that there needed to be a way of the STG becoming engaged in the programme mechanisms. And we wrote back suggesting a sensible way in which that could happen.
Yeah, that correspondence that you had was in an email form on the 18th and 28th of March.
Yes.
You acknowledged the work of the STG.
Yes.
The work on emergency exiting, and agreed to Sport NI presence on the 3 steering groups. Is that right?
Yes.
And those groups are right. Okay. And
I think I should say that I don't see that as Sport NI raising a big red flag. I see that as part of normal business in terms of managing issues that are facing the programme. That sort of email exchange would be typical of that.
But this was not to the extent that Paul Scott raised the big red flag, as you called it.
No, certainly. I mean, I can certainly be clear that at no point was anyone suggesting to me that there was a Hillsborough type scenario emerging from Casement.
First you heard of it would have been the 30th of April.
Certainly the reference to Hillsborough, the first I'd have heard of that would have been when Paul gave evidence. I knew that there were concerns about emergency exiting and, as I said, around the scenarios of emergency exiting.
Okay.
But there are ways of managing that, and Nick, I think, was quite clear in saying some of those could involve structural change, some of them might not. There are a range of different ways of addressing it. And my focus was on trying to, insofar as, I wasn't directly responsible, but looking at having an overview, was to try to make sure we managed the process to enable the problems to be resolved in whatever way that took.
And I know that you were away in November 14, but were you aware that from January 15 then Sport NI had sort of distanced themselves from?
I'm afraid I wasn't aware. I've not been aware of anything after. I haven't had any direct involvement in the programme since I left.
Okay, Chair, I come back.
Thank you. Just at the departmental board meeting on 8th of May 2014, it says, Peter, yourself made reference to the new special advisor who replaced Jarlath Kearney and the importance of keeping the Minister and SPAD informed of issues as they arise. When they kept informed then of the issues in relation to the potential difficulties that there would be, where you could end up with a stadium with a building capacity that was much in excess of the safety capacity?
Well, I think probably not in those terms, in that I was not foreseeing a situation where we would be, as a counting officer, I could not sanction a situation in which you go ahead to build a stadium with a capacity beyond that which would likely to secure a safety certificate. So certainly I wouldn't have raised anything like that in those terms. As I said, I think that the papers for the steering group and the steering group themselves would have made some reference to the issue of emergency exiting as one of a range of issues that needed to be addressed.
But over a long period, there was a request going for, please provide us with some design for emergency exiting to address this issue. That was the request that was going forward, because people realised it was not going to be possible on the existing scheme to have a build capacity that was not greater than or to have a safety capacity that was equal to the build capacity. You would have had a situation potentially where you build for 38,000, but you can maybe only put 15, 20, 25, whatever into it. That would be, that's if there is a long delay and people are not coming forward with this, and that seems to be the impression we were given by the documentation. If there was this long delay and people were not coming forward, designers were not coming forward from the design team to address this issue, we're sitting there. You were sitting then as the accounting officer, the permanent secretary, presiding over a situation where there was a long delay and nothing appearing to address an issue. How would you respond to that?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I think the first of those requests you've said was in April or March, April of 2013. I'm afraid I was not aware those requests were made at that time. What I was aware was that there was an ongoing process of dialogue between the stadium team and the STG. Nick, I think, set out some of the meetings that had happened in the autumn of 2013. I think there have been meetings prior to that as well. So I think that there was, there may not have been a formal plan submitted, but I think there was an ongoing dialogue and discussion about what it would take in order to resolve the emergency exiting issue.
There was a request for this before you arrived in the department, as you've just said.
Yes.
When you left the department, it still wasn't resolved. So how long do you give people to do this? Is there not a point where somebody actually says, hold on, this is just impossible to do?
Well, I don't think that it's not about whether it's impossible or not. It's about what adjustments need to be made in order to make it, in order to make
but
a
there could be a point you would accept where
I do absolutely understand that, and I think what you see. The December board minutes, the December steering group minutes make reference to Antoinette McEwen and Noel Malloy having a conversation about emergency exiting. In March, Antoinette and I agreed that the safety technical group should be engaged through the steering groups fully into the programme. I've a note of a short submission which was sent to the Minister just before the July holidays in 2014, which has 3 lines at the end of it about emergency evacuation. And they say, following a useful meeting between the GAA and PSNI, the contractor is responsible for advancing evacuation arrangements with the Safety Technical Group and Belfast City Council. The contractor is developing proposals for discussion with those parties. So, again, I think that's a further indication that there was an ongoing process. I accept the committee might well say, well, when was that process going to end? Clearly, it's in all of our interests to try and close down issues as quickly as we could, but we hadn't got to that point by the time that I left my post, and I recognise that.
Okay. Alderman McMullen.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. The Red Book and the Green Book, I'm still a wee bit mixed up with this here.
Okay, well, I'm not a technical expert either, I'm afraid.
No.
My understanding is the Green Book is the standards that apply in Great Britain, and the Red Book is a Northern Ireland version of the Green Book. And it may vary in some degrees, but it doesn't vary hugely, is my understanding.
Is there a difference in the 2 books, a difference in standards?
Different colour.
I think there may be some differences, but they're not large in number, is my understanding, and I don't know the detail of what those differences are. I'm afraid you'd have to ask someone with more technical knowledge than I've got.
Would it make a difference to a contract if one book was used more than the other, or one book?
Well, I think, Oliver, we're getting into areas here. Peter said he's not a technical expert.
It clearly could make a difference if they were material, but I'm not in a position to make that judgment.
There could be a difference if we use one book or another.
And I think perhaps the bigger risk actually is around how you interpret the standards.
Right.
Because clearly you've got one set of regulators working in Great Britain who are well used to the processes. You've another set of regulators in Northern Ireland who are used to providing safety advice on a rather different basis.
Yes. So, can I ask the question, and it's not to do with the technical side of it, which book was used for the Stadia programme?
My understanding it was the Red Book, because that's the one that applies in Northern Ireland.
The Red Book was used the whole time?
That's my understanding.
Right. On safety, was there we did hear when we got the presentation, Paul Scott in here, the word of a Hillsborough type disaster, and heaven forbid that ever be the case.
Well, I think Nick was very clear about that earlier. He said there was no stadium had been built, no safety certificate had been issued, and there was no risk to any individual. And I think that's important to reinforce that point.
Yeah, well, that's the point I'm coming around to. So, was there any mention of a Hillsborough type any time before the plans were submitted for planning?
No.
Everybody was happy?
Well, I think I've recognised that there were ongoing issues to be resolved with the safety technical group, and nobody had raised something that said there was a Hillsborough type scenario from these plans. And indeed, there was a transparency at the steering group about where we were on each of the projects. Each of the governing bodies and Sport NI were present at those discussions. Nobody at any point said you should not proceed to planning permission until this issue has been resolved. It was not being flagged as an issue of that scale at that time by any party.
So when we were told about the Hillsborough type disaster here on the issue of safety, that was not the case before planning?
There was no mention of Hillsborough.
Right. When you talk about the process ongoing...
Or anything equivalent.
Right, okay, that's fair enough. When you talk about the process ongoing there, Peter, when you were talking about Belfast City Council and all of that there, how much were Belfast City Council involved in the drawing up of the plans and the submitting of the plans to planning? What were their roles?
I think they probably wouldn't. I mean, I'm not clear, but I suspect that they did not have a big role because it was not their project. So they would have been members of the safety technical group and they would have had sight of the design, but I'm not sure that they contributed significantly to the development of papers for the planning permission.
So they would have sight of the design before the application to planning?
Yes.
Yeah.
They'd have been on the safety technical group which saw all of the designs.
So therefore it would be safe for me to assume that they would have been in that group, or they would have been the same as the rest of the group. They would have been happy about the plans going in for planning.
Well, I don't know that. I don't know that for sure. What I know is that nobody raised something that said we shouldn't proceed to planning.
Is there any minutes or any notes or is there any written evidence of that?
I think maybe you'd be better asking the department because I don't have access to all of the records in my new role and I can't possibly answer that question. I'm not aware of any records.
You're not aware of any records, you know. And are we happy that there is a proper paper trail to all of us?
Well, certainly, so far as I'm aware, there was a proper record taken of all the substantive decision-taking meetings, steering group meetings. There was a proper programme documentation which was subject to gateway review and assessment and so on. So I'm not saying somebody couldn't find something that should have existed that didn't, but so far as I'm aware, it was all built as solidly as possible.
I'm just finishing up on this here. I'm just trying to figure out, because when we got the presentation from Mr. Scott, it was a doom and gloom story, you know, on safety issues.
Yes.
And this does not seem to be doesn't seem to be the situation prior to applications being submitted.
No, I mean, it was not elevated as an issue that was one that would stop us proceeding to planning permission. So, if Mr. Scott may or may not have believed that, I don't know, but it wasn't drawn to my attention certainly.
But as you said yourself, he was privy to all of that, the designs and everything else prior to applications being.
I think there was an open book in terms of the design was always being shared, and again, Nick Hartness explained there was a kind of iterative process, which is kind of what you would expect. This was happening, of course, not just for Casement, but it was happening for Windsor, and it happened slightly different for Ravenhill because the SDG was actually established after planning permission was established for Ravenhill.
But nobody voiced a concern in the fact that this shouldn't be submitted for planning.
I don't recall anyone doing so, no. I don't believe they did.
Right, thank you.
Just following up on that, so nobody at all within DCAL, not Sport NI, not the STG, none of the sports officials within your department or the SRO or yourself thought there was an issue about going forward for planning permission plan that might well not have received, and as we now know, wouldn't have got.
Well,
a safety certificate of 38,000. Why would you go for planning permission for a 38,000-seater stadium when it had been flagged up? It might well not get that safety certificate.
Well, I was not clear that it wouldn't have secured a safety certificate for 38,000 at the time that planning was submitted, and there was still, as I've highlighted, work going on right through 2014 to try to identify ways of resolving the issue. There were a number of different options that were being considered, some of which would have involved structural change, and it's true that if you do make any significant structural changes, you do then need to seek to amend the planning permission, and obviously it would depend on the scale of those structural changes, but the work had not been completed, and I think we all took a view collectively that it was we'd made enough progress to seek planning permission and to take it from there and seek to resolve the issue in parallel rather than in sequence.
Can I just ask quickly, Chair, why would you think Mr. Scott referred to it as a Hillsborough type situation? What would have made Mr. Scott say that, well, considering he never said it before the application?
I can't obviously put myself in his shoes. I can only surmise that he was indicating that any stadium that had more people in than was safe would be subject to a risk. But as we've already highlighted, there were safeguards to prevent that from ever being the case.
But in your own admission, that never came up before application.
No.
No. So
I think, though, I did not have sight of the detail of the Safety Technical Group reports. Nick Hartness read out some elements of those reports which drew attention to risks that existed, but they're precisely the risks that would exist in relation to any safety issue, but they didn't go into the sort of the Hillsborough type scenario.
And that word never appeared prior.
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Just to confirm what you've said there for the record, that if an application went in and a stadium was built that didn't comply with the Red Book, to put that number of people into that stadium would endanger their lives?
Well, I think you're I think it's easier to present it the other way, which is that could never happen because the safety certificate process is there to prevent that from happening.
Which leaves open the possibility of building a 38,000-seater stadium and you end up with 18,000 seats lying empty because you can't use them.
But to be clear, we hadn't moved to the stage of issuing a construction notice, which would be the point at which...
Rory Muskelly told us that on the 11th of December, construction work would start in January. That's January 14. January 15. Sorry, January 15, sorry.
Yes.
So he came to our committee on the 11th of December, 4 days before the final judgment in the judicial review, and said we'll be on site in January. Well,
I know you're going to be hearing from Rory shortly, so it's not easy for me to answer on that. But we did have discussions. There are works that need to be done on the site that would, for example, the demolition of the existing stands and so on, that could have been taken forward. And at one point, we did wonder whether it would be practical to move ahead before the judicial review to take those steps, because they would not affect the footprint of the future building. So there are, there is some scope there, but the fundamental point is that we had a stadium that met normal emergency exiting requirements. It was about finding ways of managing the various scenarios that were being presented, and it was about making sure that a proper risk-based approach was being taken in respect of those scenarios, such that we could maximise the capacity for the stadium.
Of course, it is those emergency and unexpected circumstances that create a Hillsborough-style disaster.
I'm sorry?
It's those emergency and unexpected and unusual circumstances that create a Hillsborough-style disaster.
And I'm indicating that we clearly needed to have resolved those issues in order to be able to move forward.
David Hills.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's probably lucky that Paul Scott did use the word Hillsborough, because people have actually sat up and paid attention now. Let me make it very clear, one casualty or one life lost is too many. if it comes down to bad planning, bad strategies, bad process?
Safety is an absolute. It's not about, you absolutely have to comply with the safety standards as they exist at the time.
So in your answer to Oliver, Peter, you indicated that there was no objections to planning getting in, but sure, the STG hadn't seen the plans.
I believe they had, but I thought they'd seen the designs and commented on them. Otherwise, how could they have raised concerns?
We've been repeatedly told that they hadn't seen.
I think it's the emergency exiting plan they hadn't seen rather than the designs.
Yeah, which he said was ongoing, but yet nobody had been in touch for nearly 2 years with the STG.
I don't think that there has been no contact. I think there have been very regular contact and meetings. I think
but nothing had come forward.
There was no formal. My understanding now is that there's no formal plan that had been brought forward on
but
the
they have to
emergency
give the go-ahead too,
exiting.
or to make alterations to your suggestions or recommendations.
Yes, but I think the conversations, and again, in his evidence, Nick Hartness drew out some of the different elements that were being looked at in terms of whether it's possible to, or sensible to widen some of the exits, whether it's possible to produce a strip of ground along gardens, or whether it was possible to create a holding area, and so on. So there were a range of options that the Safety Technical Group and those responsible for the design were considering and addressing. It's true that there may have been no formal plan produced, but it's not that there was no
nothing
contact.
Nothing came forward for 2 years.
As I said, no formal plan had been produced to accept that.
What did you could just ask them why, if that was the case, did establish the Permanent Secretary and the SRO then within the department? So why did neither of you do something to press that issue ahead? Because all of this was holding up the spend profile, creating financial pressures.
I wasn't aware that an emergency exit plan had been requested, so I wasn't in a position then to explore that issue. I was unaware that had been asked for.
Who should have told you?
Well, I guess I'm not sure that I would expect to have been told in the first instance. It may be over time. As I said, emergency exit increasingly came onto the table as being something that became increasingly something to be resolved for the next stage of the programme. So I was, again, while a lot has been made of the fact the initial request was being made in March, April 2013, I'm not clear, certainly it wasn't raised at the steering group or at any of the other fora that I was at, that there was this outstanding documentation that was missing, as it were. So I don't know how persistent and I don't know how exactly it was elevated if there was such a level of concern about the absence of the plan.
Would you not have expected the senior responsible officer, and the clue is probably in the word responsible, to have alerted you to this issue?
I don't know whether Cynthia was aware of that request or not. I had no way of judging that.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair,
sorry, David.
Well, they can't just finish off there. Obviously, BBC News reports over the Easter period alerted the public to the potential of the stadium from grinding to a halt over safety issues, and you've alluded to the fact that there were many challenges going on during the period of time, the Crusaders Challenge, the JRs and various things. Why was the committee, and it's probably why we're sitting here today, why was the committee never told at any point that there was a problem, that we had to dig it out ourselves?
In relation to emergency exiting specifically, or in relation to the other issues?
That's the issue that seemed to be brought into the public domain through news reports and whatnot and stuff, that was going to be the big problem.
Well, as I've tried to outline, during my time, this was only ever seen as one of a number of issues. It was never seen as the preeminent issue that needed to be resolved.
The committee knew about all the other issues. We were told about everything else going on alongside, but this is the one issue that was seen to have been held back.
Right. I don't believe that there was any deliberate attempt to do so.
Okay, just asking questions.
But I suspect, as I said, it's often raised as one of a number of issues in the context of cases.
This is one issue where £6 million of public money has already been spent, and we're no further on.
Well,
I expect the committee to have been told something at some stage.
We're further on in the sense that my understanding is that that £6 million produced a design for the stadium and has
could be faulty.
Well, which may need to be adjusted, but is still it's a design and is the kind of the proportion of the overall spend that you would normally expect to be expended on the design phase of the programme.
You'd expect there's something more substantial at this stage. The number of years and the number of spend we are down the road.
Well, clearly, we've hit some delays in terms of delivering the programme. I absolutely accept that.
Thank you.
Rosie McCorney.
Margaret Carney, and thanks for the presentation. I suppose a lot of it has been covered, but if I can just maybe draw out maybe a wee bit more. You were involved for about 18 months then?
Yes.
These projects. So you had the 3 stadia, and you would have been aware that they were ongoing and people were working.
Yes.
Trying to.
At different stages of development, each of the 3 of them.
Yeah, and issues of concern then are common in projects like this, in that there are issues that get worked out along the way. So
Yes.
with safety exiting, emergency exiting, would that have been an issue of concern that would have been raised in Windsor and what do you call the other one?
Ravenhill?
Ravenhill,
or
yep.
Kingspan, depending on whether you take the new language or not. I recall at the time when the Ulster wished to host the quarter-final of the European Cup, and that would a lot of effort was put to try to complete the construction of Ravenhill in time to enable that. The key issue was whether it would be possible to secure a suitable safety certificate in time for the delivery of that match, and the work that was done. So that gave me some sense of how the safety certificate process featured right at the end of the period after the construction, and obviously that was successfully achieved.
And was that a wee bit of a crisis because it was so late?
Well, I think it wasn't a crisis. I think it was just one of those things where a lot of people worked very hard in order to make it happen, because we could all see the advantages of it.
Okay, so then the issue of emergency exiting for the 3 stadia, they were all part of ongoing processes as far as you were concerned. Is that your estimation?
In relation, I think in relation, it was clear that the issue was being raised particularly in relation to casement. And I don't recall there being a reference or a concern about Windsor, but I don't recall that, no. So I think it's fair to say that it was with casement that the issue was primarily being identified as we went into 2014.
But it wasn't being elevated to the level of an issue that required particular intervention?
Well, there were different ways of trying to sort it out, but it wasn't being seen as the red flag, or the red rag, or whatever language one wants to use.
What I'm really trying just to clarify and establish, just to pin down, whenever we got the reference to Hillsborough, that was the first time we'd heard about it, and
yes.
would that generally have been a surprise then to yourself?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but, absolutely, because of the reasons that I think we've already rehearsed quite fully.
Okay then.
Okay, Gordon Dunn.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for coming in today. Just in relation to what you heard earlier on, and in some detail from Sport NI officials, and their clear admission that the plans that went forward did not have their approval, did not have the sign-off. What's your opinion on that evidence that you've heard today? Is that a good way to do business? As a very senior civil servant who obviously was last in line to the Minister in relation to this project, how do you see that after listening to that evidence today?
Well, as I tried to explain, I saw the emergency exiting as one of a number of issues that needed still to be resolved in order to finalise in relation to the...
Just one-off? It's just a one-off?
When I was working through this programme, yes. That was the way in which it was being presented. That's the way in which the reports to the steering group would have come forward. And, I think that is right. It was one of a number of issues. Not a significant issue, and an issue which I've highlighted. Various efforts were being made to try to resolve, but not a showstopper issue at that stage.
It's not a showstopper?
Well, clearly you need to get it right in order to make progress. So all these issues could become showstoppers, but it wasn't being raised in those terms.
Is it not a showstopper for 2 years?
I'm sorry?
Was it not a showstopper for the guts of 2 years?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, there was no forthcoming emergency exiting plan for how long? 2 years?
Yeah, well, yes, but I understand that there was no plan, but I'm not sure that says that it was a showstopper.
Well, what else was holding up the construction work? and the planning application, all the rest. Why was it taking? What was holding it up?
JR.
Well, there was a need.
Before we get to
the design contract
was after the planning application had been successful.
The design contract needed to work its way through, and you had to actually, and Rory will be able to tell you more about the detail of that shortly, I'm sure. But there was a design phase to be gone through before, and a lot of work done with residents and others in order to try to secure an acceptable design for the stadium. I recall, for example, at one stage, the team trying to see how whether it was possible to make the floor of the stadium lower in order to reduce the height overall, and there's a limit to what could be done because of the water table. So, there are a wide range of different issues that were being addressed during that period, and emergency exiting was not the sort of the one that was holding back progress at that time.
In hindsight, was that a mistake?
Well,
that was not addressed.
I think that it'll be easier to judge that when we see what it's possible to deliver by way of a stadium. Clearly, if the talk of an 18,000-seater stadium were true, then that would suggest that, yes, it was a mistake, but it's not my expectation or belief. Well, I think that's what was being suggested was the numbers who could exit by Mr. Scott when he was here. I'm not clear. I only read the transcript, but clearly that would look like it was a mistake. But that was never my expectation as to what the realistic capacity for the stadium is. But I do accept I'm not the technical expert, and we all need to be guided by our technical experts. Which isn't to say I think that one can't exercise some challenge over that function to make sure it's being done effectively and properly.
And can you give us assurance today that you did do that?
Do what?
You did challenge effectively?
Well, as I said, I tried to be clear what the scenarios were that needed to be met, and to be clear that those are the sorts of scenarios that would apply elsewhere, and then to ensure that there was a means by which the safety technical group was sitting down with the people who needed to sit down to resolve the issue, because I'm never going to resolve a technical issue because I'm not a technical person.
Okay. There were occasions that you chaired the sponsor board in place of the minister.
Yes.
Who was responsible for reporting to the sponsor board on safety in the broadest term, including emergency exiting? Who was responsible at those meetings?
Well, there was no separate responsibility. The SRO was responsible for reporting on progress across all three programmes in relation to all material issues, which would include safety or exiting.
The SRO?
Yes.
Who was the SRO again?
Cynthia Smith.
So it was her responsibility then?
Well, as I said, it was not a specific responsibility. It's an overall responsibility to come to the steering group and to report on all of the issues relating to the stadium.
Okay. You mentioned earlier something about we all made a view collectively to proceed with planning permission. Who is or who are the we that you refer to?
Well, the GAA are the ones who are the people who actually put the planning application forward because it's their stadium. Clearly, as funders, the department and the minister needed to be comfortable that things were going in the right direction in order to do so. So that would be the we in that context.
So the GAA?
The GAA put forward the planning application, not the department.
Right. And were you satisfied as the chair of just what is the sponsor board? Obviously, not a very high authority if it's only the sponsor board. But obviously, you're taking the place of the minister. In my mind, you are the accounting officer for this.
Yes.
You're accountable for it, and I think you should be aware of that.
Yes.
And so you were not satisfied at that stage, or what assurance can you give us that you were satisfied, perhaps, at that stage, that the plans put forward by the GAA were compliant?
Well, as I've said, what I knew was that the plans are labelled for exiting under a normal emergency type situation, and the issue that needed to be resolved was around the scenarios that needed to be applied as to how that would work in the event that it was difficult to exit in some areas. So that was the level of assurance that we had at that time.
Which is very poor. Had a judicial review have not taken place, how far would the programme have been on to date?
Well, I would like to think that the stadium would be being built having the issues having been resolved.
What issues?
Well, the outstanding issues, including there were a range of different issues that needed to be resolved before you could go live. There were a whole set of what's called conditions precedent that were set in the funding agreement, which all needed to be fully closed out before the construction notice could be issued and the funding from the department could flow to the GAA.
Is there not a real risk, though, that the building could have been well underway with a design capacity of 38,000 and not having the proper emergency exit plan in place?
Well, one of those
recognise that as a real risk?
One of those conditions in the plan, in the funding agreement, was that all statutory issues needed to have been met. So we needed to have a realistic expectation that we would be able to achieve the certificate in order to proceed.
But there is a clear difference in between the certificate, which is really a piece of paper at the end of the process. There's a clear difference between that and having safety built in right from the start, something that had been it should have been built in right from the very start within the whole design. The whole safety, including the emergency exiting, which to me has been left out. And you're aware, you've already said earlier, it was perhaps not a good way to proceed.
Well, just if I quote, may be helpful, in the instructions to tenderers for the new build for Ulster Council GAA Casement Park Stadium, it says the new stadium will provide modernised safety and comfort capable of maximising the safe spectator capacity and achievement of full ground certification in compliance with the Safety of Sports NI Order 2006, and then goes on to reference both the red and green guides or any other relevant guidelines that needed to be applied. So I couldn't accept that safety wasn't incorporated from the start in terms of our recognition that it was an essential element of the delivery of the programme. It wasn't being retrofitted at the end.
But you have admitted here today that the plans were put forward by the GAA and your department. Obviously, you approved that. You obviously approved the payment. I take it you approved the payment for the planning approval.
I don't recall. I don't really. I'm not sure what payment we're talking about. I don't recall specifically.
Well, there would be
a payment
application fee.
Yeah, the planning application fee.
Right. Well, certainly, I'm not disputing the fact that we were comfortable with the idea that we would proceed to the planning permission stage. So, if that involved a fee, yes.
Yeah, so you approved that, and yet you admit that the plans were put forward here by the GAA, and your department hadn't fully scrutinised them.
No, what I said was that the full set of issues had not been resolved.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor McRae.
Thank you. Does the department approve designs before they go forward to planning?
Not for the GAA.
No. Just does the department approve designs before it goes forward to planning?
I'd need to refresh my memory around the funding agreement we entered into with the GAA. I don't believe that there is a formal approval of the design required, but I think Rory Skelly, who's coming later, will be closer to the detail of precisely. I don't believe that we had to formally approve the design, no.
So when Rosalie Flanagan states in her letter that when the department approves this design to go forward for planning, what does she mean?
Well, I've already said that we did agree to the fact that it should go to planning. I'm not sure that we formally approved the design, as it were. That would imply...
Well, you were an acting permanent secretary. Yeah. You took over from a permanent secretary. The permanent secretary, and I quote, I think you have this letter.
Which letter are we talking about?
We're talking about this letter of the 8th of October 2012. And if I just quote, it says, I'll show it to you. You can read it yourself. It's highlighted in green. So it says, when, not if or maybe, when the department approves.
approves the design to go forward, or this design to go forward for
Yes.
planning.
Yes. So the department approves the design to go forward for planning?
Well, I think what we're approving is that it goes forward for planning. I'm not sure that we're...
That's okay. No, do you approve? Does the department approve the design to go forward for planning?
We certainly approved the application for planning, yes.
So you approved the
Without that...
And you would have done, although that was to do with Windsor, it would have been departmental policy to approve the design to go forward for planning. You would have approved, the department would have approved the Casement Park plans to go forward for planning.
Yes, I've said that we would have, because it's so intricately linked to the funding agreement and so on, we would need to have been comfortable to proceed to...
Right, so you would have approved. Do you agree that it is essential that when the department gives such approval, that you have confirmation from the SNIOB, the PSNI and the Belfast City Council that all relevant and reasonably foreseeable safety scenarios have been considered and anticipated with the design, and, importantly, that the overall physical design is capable of achieving full spectator capacity within future venue certification?
Well, I think we took the view that needed to be met by the time the stadium was being built.
So are you demurring from this point of view that this permanent secretary is saying that when the department approves the design, it should have had confirmation that it would do that? You say that is not correct.
I'm not saying that. I didn't have sight of that letter when I was in post. So I didn't know that letter had issued. I absolutely recognise that that's a sensible way to proceed.
So can you tell me, when you were in post, did the department have a policy to seek this? Did it actually seek the approval that all reasonable foreseeable safety scenarios have been considered? Did it seek those comforts before it approved the design to go forward for planning?
Well, I think it's already clear that the department was recognising there were still issues to be resolved in relation to safety. So the answer is clearly in the case of Casement that wasn't the approach that was taken.
That wasn't the case. So the next question I have for you is, we've talked about the emergency evacuation plan, and I think that you've said beforehand that you weren't aware about the extent, or very much about the need for an emergency evacuation plan.
No, I think what I said was that I wasn't aware that there had been a series of requests made in March, April 2013 for such a plan.
Yeah. So we have a set of minutes that have been put forward to do with the 18th of December 2013, where the Chief Executive raises that there's an issue of different interpretations. Mm-hmm. So, were you at that meeting?
Yep.
You chaired that meeting?
I did.
And what was your recollection of what different interpretations meant?
Well, I think it comes back to the point of being clear that the same standards were being applied in relation to the building of stadia here as would be the case elsewhere, and under the similar guidance that exists.
Okay, so that was a matter raised. Did it come back to the board? It's raised as an issue. Did they come back and report back to the board?
I know that in subsequent meetings of the steering group, there was reference made to the fact that there was an ongoing development of an emergency evacuation plan to meet the GAA's need for a stadium.
But you didn't think during the time that you were at the meetings, or the minister was at the meeting, you didn't think it was a matter of any seriousness?
Well, as I said, we were getting a clear signal that work was ongoing to try to resolve it. I don't recall delving deeply into that specific issue at the next meeting of the steering group.
So at the next meeting of the steering group on the 13th of March 2014, the SRO reports work continues with the UCGAA and the Safety Technical Group on the development of an emergency evacuation plan for Casement. Do you remember that discussion?
I don't remember the detail of it, no.
But it was raised at that.
It was I think, a constant. It was constantly being reflected in the SRO report throughout 2014.
So the issue was then raised again. This was the 13th of March. On the 10th of April, the minutes of the meeting state the development of an emergency evacuation plan for Casement to meet GAA's need for a 38,000 capacity stadium is ongoing. That's in the minutes.
Yep.
The SRO raised work continues on the development of an emergency evacuation plan for Casement, and on issues emergency evacuation plan to be further developed to meet GAA's need for a 38,000 capacity stadium. So this is the third meeting now. Is it starting to be an issue yet?
Well, as I've highlighted, it was an issue, and it became it was being taken as a significant issue throughout all of 2014.
No, I don't think you said it was not the red line issue. You said it was actually there were more pressing issues. That your argument was it hadn't really bubbled up. So is it a significant issue or not?
It was one of a range of issues that was being addressed, as I think is clear from the minutes, because the minutes reflect a whole series of different things that were being discussed.
So that was the 10th of April. So on the 4th of June 2014, the minutes state the development of an emergency evacuation plan for Casement to meet GAA's need for a 38,000 capacity stadium is ongoing. The SRO reports, your deputy, work continues on the safety and technical group on an emergency evacuation plan. Issues, emergency evacuation plan needs to be further developed to meet the GAA's needs for 38,000 capacity stadium. How long do these meetings take, typically?
They might take, I don't know, around an hour and a half, perhaps.
So we've raised it. So we're now in the 4th month. So if I move on to the next meeting, which is the 3rd of September 2014, you're still in post at this stage.
Yeah, that's correct.
Minutes, resolution of the emergency evacuation issue in consultation with the safety technical group. The SRO reports work continues by the UCGA on the development of an emergency evacuation plan. Issues, emergency evacuation plan to meet the GAA's 38,000 capacity stadium. So we're raising it again, and you still don't think it's an issue?
Well, I've not said it's not an issue. I've just said that it was one of a number of issues that were being addressed with a view to resolution. And I accept that what you're highlighting, fairly, I think, is that the issues had not been finalised and bottomed out by that step.
What I'm raising is that you or the Minister chair these meetings. They were raised continuously as being a problem. I can refer you to the evidence given by Nick Harkness early on, which I think you're aware of. He reports that on the 18th of March, Antoinette McKeown, by email, sent you an email regarding issues affecting the safety at Casement Park, which had potential to cause delay. She reinforces the point, potential for risk on this critical area of responsibility. She raises that with you.
Indeed. And if you read that email, I think any normal reading of that email says that, yes, I'm flagging this as an issue, but it's not saying this is the showstopper. So, absolutely. If you read those emails, that's I think a fair reflection of where I thought things were.
So you were aware that they had a problem. You might not have thought that, but they thought they have a problem. That Antoinette is raising this issue.
It's not their problem. It's a problem that needs to be resolved for the programme.
So we also have a note that on the 20th of May, that Nick Harkness actually briefed the Deputy Permanent Secretary on emergency exiting concerns. So
I think what he said was that he had a word with Cynthia in the margins of a reception in Parliament Buildings. So I'm not sure that counts as a briefing, but yes, I'm sure he did mention it to her.
So on the 4th of June 14, in preparation for the 4th of June Stadium Programme Board meeting, he actually raised the issues about change of advice, reduced capacity, widening exits and relocate project boards. So this information was made available through the chain of command. Did Cynthia Smith ever contact you saying there is issues being raised by Sport NI. Did she ever communicate with you that there were problems?
Well, it was either Cynthia or it would have been through the programme team would have reflected the fact that the safety technical group still had issues, yes.
Okay. You made in your opening remarks that you thought that there wasn't too much of a problem with Andersonstown Road because you'd driven down it and you thought it was quite extensive.
I did not say that, Basil. I'm afraid that's a gross misrepresentation of what I said.
I give you the opportunity to clarify for my education what it is that you thought you said.
What I said was that I thought it entirely reasonable to ask questions about the scenarios that we were being asked to meet, including the scenario that all of the Andersonstown Road would be unavailable. But I also very clearly said that this would be a technical issue that needed to be resolved. And I am not a technical expert.
Did you think, having driven down it, because I can't remember exactly what you said, but we'll check the record, having driven around, I had the impression you thought it was quite a long entrance and it would take quite a lot to close it in its entirety.
But I'm clear that I'm a layperson offering those views, and I think I made that clear at the time.
So the fundamental issue, however, which was made clear in the outline business case, is that you were trying to shoehorn a 38,000 capacity stadium into an existing site which would have complicating issues. Were you aware of that issue?
Well, I think everyone is aware that there are challenges with the site, not least in terms of securing community acceptance for the stadium. So there were different challenges with each of the stadia.
And as the member of the board who chaired the committee from time to time, are you of the opinion now, having heard the evidence that was discussed regularly in your meetings, that actually it is not a problem, that you're not asking you for the technical brief, that's for others, but in general terms, do you think it's going to be okay, we're going to get a 38,000-seater stadium in that place?
Well, things have moved on since the time that we were looking at a 38,000-seater. It's for the GAA to bring forward revised planning proposals, and I don't know. I've no idea what their thinking is in terms of the future.
But your opinion, as the person that was chairing this important committee in the minister's absence, and I will ask you about the minister in a moment, but your opinion as the chair of this committee, looking at it for over a year, with the record there, with all of the information coming from your advisors in Sport NI or the Safety Technical Group, do you think there is an ongoing issue, or can the issue be resolved?
Well, there was an ongoing issue which I knew we needed to find a resolution to one way or another, and that would either involve a change in the plans, or if it was not possible through a change in the plans, it would have to involve a change in the capacity. It was clear that you would have had to have resolved the issue. So
what capacity do you think, what scenario did you consider in reducing the capacity that would make?
Well, we were fixed in the first instance in seeing whether it was possible to deliver the original capacity of 38,000 and see whether it was possible to do that. And if that wasn't possible, then clearly you'd have to look at other scenarios, but we haven't got that far.
What discussions did you have with the Minister regarding this important issue?
I don't recall having detailed discussions with the Minister on this issue. As I said, she took a series of regular briefings from the team themselves, and I wasn't present for the majority of those meetings.
Could just go to pause there. Who in the team would have given those briefings?
Well, it would have been, in the first instance, during 2013, Noel Malloy or Kieran McGurk, and then thereafter it would have been Kieran or Rory Miskelly.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll finish, because maybe the Chair will let me come back after others have had their say. But can I say to you that I think it is almost unbelievable that a stadium construction, a flagship project, the biggest capital spend in the history of the department, recognising that you were trying to put a new stadium in an old space, that nobody thought to consider an emergency exit scheme.
It's not true that nobody was considering an emergency exit scheme. It's clear that there needed to be proper emergency exiting in place in order to secure a safety certificate.
Well, I can tell you, as it stands at the moment now, and there's been a lot of play about Hillsborough, did you mention the word, did you not mention the word? Let me tell you, whether the word was mentioned or not, every single person responsible for the design of the stadium in a crowded position with objections from residents, with judicial reviews that have gone forward. It is inconceivable that you did not consider an emergency exiting scheme as being of the paramount importance.
Thank you.
And I just want to finish on the point.
Well, thank you. But we've had a good opportunity there, I think. Appreciate the question, Basil. Dominic Bradley next.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Yeah, this is the question which I asked this morning. I wasn't able to get the answer from Sport NI, so I'm going to ask you it. In August 13, when you were in post, correct? Yes.
Yes.
The DCAL observer, Carl Sutherland,
Yep.
at the Safety and Technical Group, he withdrew from the meetings. He said he was very busy and could not attend the meetings, even though this was the biggest project that DCAL had on its books, and indeed the biggest ever sporting stadium project in Northern Ireland. He said that the STG could have autonomy to contact stakeholders and directly themselves, and he would require reports as and when required. Now, this morning they said that this seemed to be a laissez-faire attitude to the STG and to the safety group itself, Safety and Technical Group, as this person was the most qualified within the department on the technical and safety issues. Were you aware that Mr. Sutherland had withdrawn from his role as observer of the STG?
I don't recall it particularly. I may have been told. I can't be sure. But well, the question I think I would ask, I would disagree with the characterisation of laissez-faire. I don't believe that that was the approach that was taken. And I think that Nick Hartness, in his further evidence, drew out reasons why that isn't the case, because he outlined the 4 or 5 meetings that took place in September and October at which Carl Southern and the Safety Technical Group were both present. I suspect, but Carl will be able to answer for himself, that this was rather that he was more interested in the product from the Safety Technical Group than he was in sitting through the considerations that got them to the product, and that he felt that his time would be better served doing some of the other duties that he had. I suspect that's what it was, but you'd have to ask him to be sure.
We'll get the chance to ask Carl.
Okay, that's fair enough, yeah. On reflection, you know, there's sort of 2 themes that I've picked up around here, and one of them is this has all been blown out of proportion, and the safety issues would have been picked up further down the trail and dealt with, and finally, if not within the project group, by Belfast City Council. That's one sort of theme. The other is that there were failings which should have been addressed, and which, had not been identified, could have led to major consequences. So which one of those 2 views would you say reflects the situation?
Well, there's a project assessment review being carried out by the department.
No,
one of the core.
In your experience.
I'm going to answer, but I'm just going to give a little bit of context before I do, if that's okay. One of the key considerations in that is whether we were wise to proceed to go for planning permission without having finalised out the emergency exiting issue. And I'll be interested to see what the review finds on that, because I think it may well be on reflection that that's something that we should have done differently. So that's kind of where I am. I think that on the first point, I wouldn't describe it as being blown out of proportion. But I think that, as I said at the beginning, if one only looks at one issue in the context of our big programme with many issues, then it's possible to lose where that sits against everything else that's going on at any given point in time. It's obviously an important issue and one that needed to be addressed and resolved. I am confident that we would have addressed it and resolved it, and we wouldn't have built the wrong stadium for the capacity. But I'm not in any sense saying that everything we did was perfect, because I've very rarely, if ever, been involved in a programme where that's been the case and been demonstrated to be the case afterwards.
Okay, so you would tend to the view that there were issues which should have been identified. And
I'm sure there are things we could have done differently and better, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Leslie Creed.
Thanks, Chairman. Afternoon, Peter.
Hi, how are you?
Feels like this evening already, doesn't it?
Well, I'm conscious you've got more people to see yet, so it's
Peter,
well feel like that for you.
Safety was clearly an issue here from the start. You can pick it up all the way along. It had been identified, needed to be addressed. The difficulty is that Rory Muskelly had suggested, and he's on record here, in fact he argued that this issue could be dealt with during and after construction.
Well, not. I think some of it can't be done. If you're going to change the design, you can't do it after construction, to be clear.
No, that's right. I mean, it leaves a very narrow window, doesn't it not? It's clear that everyone wanted to push on with this, and capacity looks like it was a main driver.
There was a capacity that we were trying to work to, yes, absolutely.
Could it be that somewhere down the line, some people who were involved recognised there was a tension between capacity and safety and chose to leave the safety alone? Would that be unfair?
That would be unfair, yes. You would not build a stadium that wasn't safe.
Right. On the 25th of July 14, North Northern Ireland got a note from Kieran McGurk.
So do you have a reference in this pack?
Yes, it's table 20.
Okay, thank you.
The table.
Which note are we talking about?
Dated the 25th of July, page 24 in our pack.
Okay, so I don't have that one, but that's... Okay. A telephone call, yes?
Yeah. You see the first bullet point there advises, which surprised me when I read it at first, that matters in Casement will not progress, this is in July 14, until GIA provide decal with emergency exiting plan.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the plan was going to be provided by the GIA.
Yes. It's their stadium.
Their team. Do you feel that that was merely simply leaving the buck with the GIA, bearing in mind that the run-up was to get the planning application in?
The planning would have been through by that point. We were awaiting the judicial review, I think, July 14. I think actually what I take from that is that responsibility for the actual... I mean, a lot of the emergency exiting plan is actually about how you manage and run the stadium once you've built it. The GAA hadn't a stadium director in post by that point, but clearly they were responsible for bringing forward the plans as to how it would work. It's not simply about bricks and mortar, it's also about the mechanisms you have to exit people. And I'm not an expert and I don't want to pretend to sound like one, but I know that there's more to it than that. So it's absolutely right that it shouldn't be for the department to produce an emergency exiting plan. We weren't going to be running the stadium. The GAA would be running the stadium. That's not passing the buck, that's making sure actually you've got to have the plan owned by the people who run the stadium. That's absolutely right. Our clarity was that the money, which is our bit, wasn't going to flow until such time as we had satisfaction around that. And I think in some ways that's actually showing that the team were recognising the need for the plan to come forward.
Yes, but there was no urgency shown. It could also be construed as the department was really quite, I think Dominic used the word laissez-faire about it, but clearly weren't driving this issue.
I would say that in respect to all three of the stadia, the department played a strong and proactive role in trying to deliver the programme for government commitments to try and make sure these stadia happened, and happened in a way that was appropriate, good, safe, and all of the rest of it for the good of Northern Ireland.
Right.
So I'm very confident and very sure about that.
So you said that there were several issues needing resolution. When it came to the end of the line, we know that exiting was one of the things that had not been resolved.
Yep.
Were all of the other issues resolved at that point?
At which point are we talking about?
At the end of the line, when you were actually going out for planning application, project finalised?
No. There were, as I said, there were a whole series of conditions precedent in the funding agreement that needed to be resolved. I don't have a list to read them out. There was an issue which got into the press about, which was also critical around the social club and how that was going to work in casement, and that was only resolved in, I think, late summer 2014. So there would have been a whole series of different things that still needed to be resolved.
So therefore, I guess the thinking must have been then we can resolve these things afterwards. Is that right?
Resolve them after planning, yes.
Mm-hmm. I think that perhaps was a major mistake with the benefit of hindsight. Because if you've developed a stadium that's designed to hold 38,000 people,
well,
safety said, I'm sorry, you can't, and see the minister still pushing 30, it's interesting, but you know, you can't have more than 21 or whatever. It's been a lot of wasted effort. You should clear those issues early on.
I mean, I answered Dominic Bradley, and I recognised that that's something that, as I said, I'd be interested to see what the project assessment review says. You have to remember, Ravenhill went through the process of having planning approval before the STG was actually constituted. That said, of course, there would have been safety advice being offered around Ravenhill during that period. So no, I mean, I understand that that's a key point, and one where with my level of professional knowledge, I'm not really in a position to reach a judgment, and that's why I think somewhere like the Project Assessment Review, which are people who are experts at delivering programmes of this nature, what they have to say on that would be of relevance.
Final question, Peter. I mean, you have said that no one told you that the importance of the exiting plan.
No, I didn't say that. What I said was that nobody told me that there had been a number of requests for the exiting plan in March and April 2013. I recognised, and it was by perhaps the end of 2013, beginning of 2014, that I was being told that emergency exiting was an issue. It wouldn't have been something that I think was flagged in my early time in DCAL when I was trying to come to terms, and the programme was in a different place then, to be fair, as I referenced some of the challenges that we were facing in relation to state aids and the court case that Crusaders were bringing and so on, and that was absorbing a lot of time. Some of the more technical issues, wouldn't necessarily have been brought to my attention given my non-technical background, I guess.
You don't think that was negligent of them then?
Well, I don't think it was negligent at the time because, as I said, I think it was an issue that people were trying to resolve. As it became clear it hadn't been resolved, and Basil's rehearsed what happened in the various steering group meetings from December 2013 onwards. So it was being flagged as an issue at the top table, as it were, and I think that's entirely appropriate.
Okay, thanks, Peter.
Karen McKellar.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks very much, Peter, for coming this afternoon to the inquiry here. On page 195 of our packs, it states that the Casement Park Safety Technical Group had comment on the proposal submitted, and although there were some deviations from the Red Book or the Red Guide, it considers that it was appropriate. The content of it was appropriate for entering, circulation and exiting under normal conditions.
Yes.
During question here from other members then, it talked about the report not coming up on an emergency exit strategy.
Plan, yes.
Yeah, was that plan just for a unique exiting, or was it for all exiting? Because they were happy, the STG were happy with the exiting under normal conditions. So was that just? I think
I'm sure you would need an emergency exit plan to cover all circumstances because you need to cover all emergencies. The fact that the stadium is technically able to have 38,000 people leave within 8 minutes is not enough without there being a plan as to how that was actually going to be made to happen, I think is the point.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Also then, on page 197, it's tab 15 and 16, and through with the email
Yes.
that was sent from Antoinette, and they talked about the issues affecting the safety of Casement Park, and about the advice and issues that the department were given, and it wasn't just introduced more recently, and I'm sure
Yes.
It was raised before. So that was dated in March 2014.
Yes.
Could you give us more insight into maybe what you thought that email was about?
Well,
given that it was only highlighted here quite recently about
Yes.
the seriousness issue around the health. and
Yes,
safety.
well, I mean, I agreed with a large part of what I heard Nick Hartness say in relation to different aspects, but I don't agree that this is elevating the issue and the weight which he placed on that, because the tone and nature of this email is the business as usual. It is a suggestion, a process suggestion about how the Safety Technical Group could be engaged in the work of the programme, which we responded to, I think, sensibly and appropriately. And as I said, the SWAT and I were on the steering group and could have said that they didn't think we should have proceeded to seek planning permission if that had been their view at the relevant point of the conversation, and they did not do so. So I'm not saying that they didn't raise issues, and it's clear from all of the conversations we've had that there was an ongoing issue. There was various efforts were being made to resolve. But they were not being elevated in quite the way, in my view, that was described earlier.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, just a couple of points, Chair, to raise here. First of all, you've seen there, I think, that you probably have in front of you there the list of all of the exchanges that was produced by Sport NI.
Okay.
If you had seen all those emails and reports and exchanges, would it not have flagged up with you that there was a very serious issue? You see it put together there. We hid those from you.
I'm sorry?
If you had seen all those emails and exchanges, you would have been, I would assume, aware of the seriousness of the issue. So I'm asking the question, who hid those from you? It seemed to me right and proper if somebody at some level in the organisation has all these, they would pass them up.
Well, I'm not sure. I don't think that they were hidden from me. As I said, I would have got a series of briefings from the team in which at various times they would have mentioned those issues. I think, as I said, particularly perhaps towards the end of 2013. It seems to me normal that in any programme, as issues arise, so the team seek to resolve them. It's as it becomes more and more difficult to resolve those issues that they then become elevated and draw in more senior people to see if there is either more or something different that needs to be done. So I wouldn't characterise it as this having been hidden from me.
And you never saw them?
No. But hidden implies that there was a deliberate act.
Well, are you saying then that there was a failure on the part of those staff to recognise the significance of this?
Well, I'm saying that I think they brought it forward to me at the time when they thought it was of such significance it needed my attention.
Only an issue for him.
Many of us would say that was a bit late. There was another point there, build capacity greater than safety capacity.
Where are we referring to?
It's not in the document, no, this is just a comment that has been made,
okay.
that you could end up in a scenario of a build capacity that is greater than safe capacity. Was that possibility ever recorded on the Departmental Risk Register?
I would need to reflect. I don't have that in front of me, and I don't have the records. I don't recall it having been put in those terms, but I would need to check it.
Certainly was a risk.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that?
Well, as I said, I think, in my view, it was something that needed to be resolved before we got to that stage.
Wasn't going to be much chance to do it if Rory Muskelly was in here on the 11th of December telling us that construction work would be starting in January. Could I ask also, were these issues ever raised at the departmental business meeting?
Which meeting are we referring to here? The
the departmental business meeting that would take place in the department on a regular basis, where the permanent secretary meets with all the senior officials.
Yeah, if you mean the sort of Monday morning meeting that that we would have had. During my early time, it was not normal for the stadium director to come to those meetings. I would have picked up separately in relation to his issues. It was only towards the end of my time that the programme director started to attend, and then he would have given a flavour of any issues, focusing very much on what had happened the week before and what was expected to happen in the week ahead. They were quite sort of tactical meetings.
Rosalie Flanagan was the permanent secretary. In her time, was she the SRO or was it Cynthia Smith?
I think she was the SRO. And when I came in, I should say that when I was appointed, it was expected I would only be there for a few weeks, a couple of months at most, perhaps. And we took the view, we agreed that it would make more sense for continuity purposes for Cynthia to assume the role of SRO rather than for it to jump to me and then to be expected to jump onto someone else fairly quickly thereafter. I think that it didn't make a significant difference. I remained closely involved in the work of the programme and as accounting officer have various responsibilities which were still mine alone to exercise.
Were you aware that at a stage in this process consideration was being given to the possibility of taking strips off people's gardens and potentially buying their houses?
I knew that there were a series of options being considered, and we hadn't reached the GA hadn't reached a view as to which was the preferred option.
Does that not flag up red flags? Any colours of flags? Does not flag up that there's something serious about this when we're talking about actually removing a portion of the garden of everybody who lives adjacent to Casement Park, or potentially buying 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 houses and knocking them down to get access? Does that not say that this is a serious issue and it is a really potential disaster in terms of taking the project forward?
Well, I think it does say that, as I said, it was one of a number of options that was being developed, and yes, it indicates the seriousness with which we were seeking to ensure that we could meet the safety requirements for emergency exits.
Does it not? It's not the seriousness with which you are treating it. Does it not indicate the seriousness of the issue itself?
Well, absolutely, yes, it is a serious
So you recognise then there was evidence before you that it was a very serious issue, but it wasn't. There were no red flags, even though you knew that people were potentially going to be asked to sell off strips of their gardens or lose their house. Does it not suggest that
it would be safety? I mean, safety is ultimately becomes a critical issue. What I was saying was that it not yet got to the point where it was going to prevent the programme, but we needed to resolve it in a period of time. It was quite late on in my time that the options were being developed around, that I certainly had visibility of some of the options that were being looked at.
Dominic Bradley used the term laissez-faire. Some of us might well say that it looks as though the top level in the department was asleep at the wheel.
Well, I would disagree with that. You would expect me to say that? I
would expect you to disagree with it, but I think it's a conclusion that many, many people looking at this will come to. Okay, thanks very much indeed for. We've got a long. Well, we have two more. Well, if they're very brief, there's two. One would be Oliver and one Basil, and then we'll have to move on. Just single points, please.
Are you happy there was a coordinated approach by everybody on this application?
On the planning application? Yeah. Well, yes, I mean, I'm happy, as I've outlined, that there was coordination between GAA, ourselves, and so on in order to bring the planning application forward. There was full visibility about the steps that we were taking.
Did it not arise at any time, and I've looked through the notes there, and I don't see any mention of it at all, that you are responsible for the budget?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, most of the budget. Some of the budget's coming from the GAA. Most of it's coming from the department.
Well, your budget, not the GAA. Now, put them to the one side. We can always come back to them. And it's not in any of these papers here at all that I can see, and I could be stand to be corrected, but was there not an element of doubt there when you put your plan and application in that you still hadn't got your exit strategy correct? That there would be extra costs there?
Well, we had a cost envelope that we were working to, and
But how could you work a cost envelope if you didn't know what was going to be there? Were you estimating?
well, there's a contingency set aside within projects of this nature that would cover things that were not anticipated. That might be one of those.
But that's a contingency plan, or money set aside to cover the whole thing, you know,
Yes.
from the smallest thing to the biggest
Yes.
thing.
And this
But that's different from what we're talking about here. We're talking about the exiting, the exit plan that was going to be part of the building after planning. How then can you estimate? How could you estimate for the complete job? Because you have your contingency money set aside. Some would call it PC sum. Then was there no fear of the budget at all?
Well, the budget was just one of those things that was being managed, and we were absolutely looking to bring it in within the envelope the executive had set us. We hadn't got to the stage where we believed that we were going to have a difficulty with that.
Would you have beg your pardon? Would you have had a difficulty with that if you're using the Green Book?
But look, how long talking about red book? Keep a green book out of it, please.
That's taking me into territory. I'm not sure the difference between the green and the red book. I don't know that was material in terms of the cost of the build.
Right. So
I don't know that it was. I'm just not expert enough to tell you.
And why I'm asking that there, because Mr. Scott himself flagged up that issue, that we have the two books.
Yes.
But you're telling me we only use the red book.
Well, that's my understanding. The red book is the one that applies in Northern Ireland.
I
It's
think
very similar to the green book.
Sorry, if I could just say there.
Can you just get this clear in my head?
But just to get it clear for the record, I think Mr. Scott was making clear that the red book, which is the one with the decal imprimatur on it, this is the department's one. It's published. It's on the decal website. The Northern Ireland one is a revision or an amendment, or I suppose a revision of the Green Book, which is in GB. So we're here in Northern Ireland, in this part of the United Kingdom, and therefore it is the Red Book that we refer to.
So we never at any time went to the Green Book. Now, this is very, very important.
Well, my understanding is that the red book was what was used.
Your understanding, you don't know.
Well,
are you telling me now you don't know which book was used?
I'm telling you what my understanding is.
Did you don't know which book?
I wouldn't expect. We can expect a permanent secretary to know an awful lot of things. There's some things probably that even a permanent secretary
as
doesn't.
I said, my understanding is it's the red book that applies here, and it's the red book that was used.
Okay,
I can't be
thanks.
clearer than that.
Thank you, Basil.
You said that you listened to what Mr. Harkness had to say earlier, and you agreed with a fair amount of it.
Yes.
Would you, if I made a statement that said Mr. Harkness seemed to be worried about the lack of an emergency exit plan and thought there were significant concerns, would that be a fair reflection of Mr. Harkness's proposals?
Yes.
Were you surprised that such concerns from Sport NI and the STG did not make it to higher levels of the project management?
I would have expected more to have been made of it at the steering group if given what Mr. Harkness said today.
Yeah, okay, so I think that is important. I think that more should have been made, in terms of making people aware, because I think there is a significant body of evidence. Can you think about why, or can you offer any observations as to why that information might not have got to the project boards?
Well, I was talking about the steering group because that's the group that I sit on, and well, I can only surmise. I don't know the answer to that question.
But you did make, and I'm checking here rather than.
Thank you.
But you did seem to say to me that the chief executive of Sport NI was on the board,
on the steering group.
On the steering group, And had she had any concerns, she would have brought them to the attention.
Yes, if they'd been elevated in the normal way, I would have expected Antoinette to have raised them. Certainly in relation to other issues, not necessarily relating to the stadia, she would have raised issues with me when they'd been elevated to her through Sport NI.
So, given that we've agreed, at least tentatively, that Sport NI had got significant concerns at a lower level, the failure to communicate may well have been at the Chief Executive Board interface?
Well, I don't know how. It's about how the information. I don't know whether the information got to the Chief Executive. I don't know what the Chief Executive then decided to do with that information. So that's the area of surmising.
Sorry, just there will be people coming in on a future occasion where there's a level above that where you move into the world of decal, and I think there's issues there about the various steps in the process. We'll come back to.
And the only point I wanted to establish on this, without being too harsh, because I understand that people don't know certain things. I just would just like to reiterate that had the concerns that have been highlighted by Mr. Harkness and others reached the board's attention, that the board would have investigated seriously. They would have taken those concerns seriously.
Absolutely. I mean, if there was a suggestion that the stadium could only accommodate 18,000 people, as Mr. Scott said when he was here, that would have been a fundamentally different proposition to the one that we were all working to.
And so at no time was that brought to your attention, and at no time, therefore, that you're aware of, was it brought to the Minister's attention?
Yes.
Could just ask then, Carl Southern was a member of staff within Decal.
Yes.
From this correspondence, is it not fairly clear that he and others at that level of the structure were aware that you might end up with only 18,000? So did they not elevate it within Decal to the right level at the top?
As I've been clear, they elevated the fact there was a concern about emergency exiting. I think none of us felt we'd got to the bottom of what that would mean. I was not told about a figure of 16 or 18,000, certainly.
So it's possible that the failure could have been at the interface between Sport NI and Decal, or that it actually permeated into Decal but stopped at a particular level and was never filtered up within.
Well, the fact of an issue was filtered up. It may be that the scale.
And I think the key point is clearly people were aware of the substance but not the significance of the issue. It was an issue about egress,
yes,
but the scale of it at the top level, we're told people were not aware of. Could I just ask a question here? There was a letter sent to us which makes, it's in our pack, page 233, makes reference to the judicial review, table pack 233. The Decal affidavit it refers to, it says, was sworn by yourself as the then Permanent Secretary on the 20th of May 2014. Do you have a copy still of that affidavit?
No, I don't, but obviously I can get one from Decal.
Okay, it would be helpful. We'll ask ourselves. We'll get Peter here. Don't worry about that. We'll get Peter to write to Decal and ask for that, because clearly there's some significance to that. And when we've seen that, we might need to ask a little question or two about that. But we'll do that in due course.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just going to offer.
And again, apologies for the delay at the start. We'll give people 2 minutes just in case anyone wants to get a cup of coffee or whatever.
Are we adjourning for 2 minutes to do a...